7 o'clock. I'll call the meeting to order. Celeste, you want to call the roll? Sure.
Ellsberg? Evans?
Here.
Kasserag?
Here.
Mead?
Here.
Rittenhouse? Slivka?
Here.
And Stocking is absent.
Great.
You have a quorum.
Okay, next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay, I guess. Next item is approval of the minutes from March 12th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Tonight we have two public hearings on the agenda. And I will, the first one is related to the Lappin PUD, and the second one is a zoning text amendment related to 609 South First. At this time, I will read the procedures for the public hearings. It is the Planning and Zoning Commission's job to conduct public hearings in order to receive testimony for and against petitions for general amendments to the zoning ordinance, zoning map amendments, zoning text amendments, special use permits, and variations. The procedure followed for public hearings is as follows. First, the Planning and Zoning Commission Secretary or the designated representative will read or describe written items, reports, and plans into the record. Second, the petitioner will present testimony in favor of the petition and will present any supporting plans or exhibits. Third, the commission members will have an opportunity to question the petitioner. Fourth, the commission will then receive written testimony both for and against the petition. Questions about the proposal may be directed to the petitioner or petitioner's witnesses, and questions about the Planning and Zoning Commission process itself may be directed to me. Following such testimony, the petitioner and the Planning and Zoning Commission may ask questions of those who testified. And finally, the petitioner may provide a rebuttal to any testimony in opposition. When all the testimony is brought into the record, the hearing will be closed and the Planning and Zoning Commission will make a recommendation to the City Council in the form of a motion or motions. In order to give testimony, you must provide your name and address on the registration sheet located at the entrance of the hearing room and sign in the space provided. By signing the registration sheet, you agree and understand that anything you say will be considered sworn testimony and affirmed to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. When giving testimony, please approach the lectern and speak directly into the microphone so that you may be heard. Please begin by stating your name and giving your address. If you speak additional times, please state your name each time for the record. Please be concise when presenting your testimony, and if your point has already been made, it is not necessary to repeat it. Each of these points is recorded and will be considered as the Plan Commission develops findings of fact and a recommendation or recommendations. You may provide your testimony in written form, but such written testimony must be presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission Secretary or the designated representative prior to the closing of this hearing. After the process is completed and everyone wishing to present testimony has spoken, the Commission will then decide whether it has heard adequate testimony in order to make a decision. If it has, the public hearing will be closed. After a public hearing is closed, the Planning and Zoning Commission will refrain from receiving any additional testimony either for or against the petition. There is one exception to the rule. City staff will submit a report based on the testimony presented at the hearing. This report will consider comments or concerns from all city departments such as the Fire Department, Public Works Department, or the Engineering Department. David, should I read this? Or no, this is the COVID. At this time, the next item on the agenda, we will start with the item 5A, which is Lappin PUD, request for an amendment to the Lappin Planned Unit Development established under Ordinance 2002-45 and amended by Ordinance 2019-16 to remove restrictions for office uses on the first floor. Property is located at 426 South 3rd Street, and the applicant is Dr. Kevin Haddle. David, do you have anything to read into the record?
I do. And the contents of this file include an application for an amendment to the Lappin PUD filed by Kevin Haddle, a response to the special use standards prepared by the applicant, a staff report from the Community Development Department to the Planning and Zoning Commission dated July 23rd, 2020, a certificate of publication from the Daily Herald for the legal notice that was published on June 30th for tonight's public hearing, then a copy of the notification letter mailed to all property owners within 500 feet of the property.
Thank you. If the applicant would like to come forward and present their petition.
Hello, my name is Dr. Kevin Haddle. I own 426 South 3rd Street. This is secondary to the pandemic situation that's occurring here in our world. In March 1st of this year, I have a tenant downstairs in the north unit of my building, and the company name was Needles and Things. She had been a part of the property and a rental of this building for approximately 6 to 7 years. She just signed a new lease last June, it would be June of 2019, for another 5 years. She was about 3 weeks late for her rent, and I'd called and asked where she had been. And she just stated that I've made the decision that I'm not going to return to the building. She did not pay for that month's rent. She left all of her materials and products in her space, and I obtained an attorney. The attorney called her. She never responded. She came randomly the following weekend and took her stuff and left the place in shambles. It cost me around $2,000 to clean it out. So right shortly after that occurred, Edward Jones approached me, who's my tenant in the back of my building, and stated that they would be willing to take over the space and they would sign a 10-year lease. I've owned this building for about 7 years, and I've had about 3 different tenants on the south end of my building, and all 3 tenants, not one of them stayed for their 5-year lease. Every one of them bailed within a year to 2 years, stating that this end of the property, or that end of 3rd Street, is a very bad spot to have a business. I've really worked hard. It took me about a year to year and a half each time to get a tenant to come into this space. So moving forward, if I were to, which I have already placed this through Keller Williams for rental, I have not got one applicant since it's been on the market since March, and I'm looking at probably another year, given the pandemic, to find somebody. We have to also consider that I'm a doctor who lost 3 months of work, and I've lost about $300,000 so far, and I'm the sole owner of the building. I don't come from money, I come from poverty. I worked hard to become a doctor, and I still owe about $150,000 in student loans. So if I continue on this path, I am not going to have any money to support this building. I'm going to have to close my practice and shut down, I'll file bankruptcy on this building, and this will likely occur by the end of this year if I don't have a tenant. So what I ask you all for is to understand my plight of what's occurring in my life right now, and give me the variance to allow Edward Jones to come into this space, to occupy the space, to pay for rent. Additionally, I would like to add that if they don't get the space, they will leave in 3 years because they want a larger space. So this completes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody on the commission have any questions for the applicant or comments?
Is Edward Jones already in the building? Is that what you're saying?
They have been in
They're in the upstairs?
2 years, and they're willing to take over space, buying space for 10 years.
The way the current ordinance is written for this, which was just done in 2019, I think, 40% of first floor space can be office, 40% of the primary use of the building. I was having trouble figuring out what limits are currently on the property versus what the applicant is asking for.
Okay. The PUD, the Lappin PUD allowed for that specific rear portion of the building that is currently Edward Jones to be office space. In 2019, when we amended the downtown zoning update and established new zoning regulations, we did allow for office uses on the first floor, which was not previously allowed. But we did cap that at 40% of first floor space, and provided that the office spaces are located in the rear of the building, so those prime retail frontage spaces are on 3rd Street remain available. So those are the current restrictions, is that it's capped at 40%, and office spaces do have to be in the rear of the
In the rear.
building.
In the property to the south, which I think is, under the the retail below the apartments, isn't there a Schwab office? Does that qualify as office space, and how does that
There is. So we also have the Dotson Place planned unit development,
right?
which encompasses properties on both the east and west sides of South Third Street. Offices are allowed on the first floor in that PUD, but there's also a cap of 25% of the total area is restricted. And the rest has to remain retail or restaurant uses.
So if this were to go through as requested, what percentage of the first floor space would be office?
Mr. Hadel could probably answer that better.
If we're looking at both spaces combined on First Street, the space to the south is now Geneva Winery, who has not opened quite yet. They've been building the space out for 1.5 years right now. They have approximately 2,500 square feet, and the north unit has approximately 1,500 square feet. Those are the only two units that face Third Street. I have a rear unit that occupies Edward Jones, and they have roughly around 2,500 square feet.
So when we do the 40, in the zoning ordinance, what the 40% is based off of Third Street frontage or all building area? Where I'm going with this is, if the PUD was to comply to the existing zoning, how close to allowing this would we be?
It sounds like we would probably be right there, because we've got 2,500 in the back and
Yes, approximately.
3,000 in the front. So yeah, we'd be
So,
right
so
around that cap.
the Needles and Things space, the old Needles and Things space is how big?
That's approximately around 1,500 square feet, I believe.
1,500, and that's what you're talking about for Edward Jones?
That's correct.
And they would keep their back space as well?
They would keep their back spacing where they would create an opening between their space right into where Needles and Things was, and they'd have a front building access point at that point. They would shut down the back part of the doors and have one entry from the front.
It would have been helpful to have just a floor plan of that first floor, just to see that.
I think that they submitted one. I'm pretty certain
I don't recall seeing one in the
they were
application.
supposed to. Yes, that was a part of the, because Keller Williams is the one that prepared everything, and then they received the architectural plans from Edward Jones, because they actually had an architect come out and build it out. And then I do believe, I remember him saying he submitted that. And if you don't have it, they certainly could get that for you.
Okay. Yeah, I
His name
haven't-
is C.J. McCann.
okay.
So where'd you end up on that map?
So we had 1,500 square feet is the southernmost.
That would be the
Street
north
frontage.
unit of the building, which is front-facing Third Street.
And Geneva Winery is 2,500
Is,
square
I think
feet?
it's approximately 22 to 2,500
So
square
that's
feet.
totals 4,000 square feet, right?
Mhm.
Of Third Street frontage, but then there's the rear building, which is attached to the home in the front, essentially, if you look at the
Yes,
two
it's a-
styles, is how big?
I think it's around 2,500.
So you get 4,000, what's 15 over 40?
Let's see,
3/8, so 37.5%.
37.5, yeah.
And I don't know if that's the right way to think about this, but that's what I was doing, is how close to that. But then if the pathway went down was to steer the approval towards the existing zoning ordinance of 40%, then if Geneva Winery went out of business, they'd have to be replaced with a retail use, right? I mean, others may have some thoughts on this.
It just,
Ma'am?
I do. Is there also a requirement that the office space, in addition to being 40%, not be fronting on Third Street?
That's correct. Under the current zoning, that's the restriction.
Okay, so the 40% isn't the only thing. So if we could make the 40% work, we'd still have to work out that piece. Would it be possible to divide that front piece that Edward Jones wants, so they just get a doorway in the front and something is retained that is not office?
So they have the ability to lease retail is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, so if it's a 1,500 square foot space, say, maybe give them some of it, enough for an entryway and some additional space, but save some small space that would be the very frontmost space, aside from Edward Jones's doorway, to be retail.
Question, does Edward Jones have signage on the front of the building now?
They do.
Is it on the building or on the monument
There
side?
is a sign on the south end of the yard that has signs that hang from it, and theirs is the top one, and then Geneva Winery has one hanging below it. And then they have signage on the rear end of the building as well, to the door that enters their business.
So in the front is Needles and Things, went out of business, and Geneva Winery.
That's correct. Those are the only two.
1,500 and 2,500 square feet.
That's it, yeah, I've always had
And that's all
two.
the frontage.
That's correct.
But Geneva Winery's on the north side,
Right.
Right.
Geneva Winery's on
The north side.
the north,
North end.
North end.
the
You- I
north
think
end,
you
that's
said
correct.
south end. I just
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah,
clarify.
Geneva Winery's on the north end, yes.
North end.
Yes.
What's on the south end?
That's, the very south end is the door up to my practice. The middle of the building is where Needles and Things is.
But they're gone.
They're gone,
So Geneva Winery's 2,500, Needles and Things was
approximately 1,500.
1,500, but that's on the fronts.
Those are
that,
the two doors in the front end of the building, that's
that
correct.
leads to Third Street, that sits on
That
Third Street.
sits on Third Street, yes.
So behind Needles and Things is
Edward Jones,
Edward Jones, and they currently have,
approximately 2,500 square feet.
and they want Needles and Things.
They want to expand, that's correct. And if they don't expand, they're going to move out.
And do they have to have 4,000 feet? How much do they have now?
Around 2,500.
So they took 1,500, be another they'd be 4,000 square feet. Do they need all of that, or?
Well, I think they're wanting to make a main office there. I don't know the details. All I know is when this happened and I lost a tenant,
Right.
they came up to me and offered me this opportunity. I took this opportunity because I have had this building for 7 to 8 years now, and I have had nothing but struggles keeping somebody in the building as a tenant. Now that we're in a pandemic, it is going to be even more difficult to find somebody to come in. And given that situation and my financial situation, I am taking the opportunity to ask you to understand the plight of my situation so that I could have a tenant in this building so I do not have to file bankruptcy. That's all I'm asking. If I were not in a pandemic and I was doing well, I'd be out there looking for retail in this building right here and now. But this pandemic is not going to end anytime soon, nor is the financial situation of this world, nor is medicine, and we're all stuck in this.
Just perhaps another way of looking at the percentages is to look at the percentage of the front, of that retail frontage. That 1,500 square feet is less than 40% of.
That's what I was just gonna
that
ask.
total retail space.
Right.
That's fronts on Third Street.
So what's the main issue here then? Because we're allowed 40% to be office, right?
Right, but the requirement is that it has to be in the rear of the building and not taking up the
And,
frontage.
oh, okay. I thought it was
Can't be
40% of
fronting
the
Third
frontage.
The PUD that was established years ago made an exception for office, again, in the rear of the building. And the request was to remove those restrictions. But the commission can make a recommendation to either deny that request, grant that request, or modify it in a way that they feel is appropriate.
But there's two things, Front Street and then over 40%.
Right, I guess what I was saying is potentially another way of looking at it is saying we'll allow it on the first floor up to 40% of the Third Street frontage. So it's still, most of the frontage still remains retail.
Right. And there's a retail component, and I appreciate what was written in here, is that the integrity of having retail block by block and not having it split up is important for a retail street like Third Street.
Right.
So I was not supportive coming in of just taking away all restrictions and allowing that whole front to be office. Because if Geneva Winery went out, they put another office tenant in, you basically skip a half block of retail. But if we focused on the 40% of the frontage and allowed Edward Jones, then if Geneva Winery went out, you'd have to look for another retail tenant.
I have no problem with that. I have my building up for sale right now. I cannot sell the building until I have a tenant. The building is based upon having tenants. And if I continue like this, I will not be able to sell the building, and I'm telling you, I'm going to go bankrupt. That's why I have the building up for sale right now. And she left the minute I put it up for sale. So moving forward, this building is not going to sell. And I'm going to be stuck there, and I'm going to be in the situation I'm in.
Sorry to be repetitive, but I just want to make sure I understand. So no office space is allowed on the frontage of Third Street, and only 40% of the other space is allowed to be office.
Correct.
Did I say that correctly?
There are PUDs like Dotson Place that allows first floor office, but it's limited to 25% of the overall frontage.
And this PUD is only this building,
Correct.
is that correct? So if we were to change anything, it would apply only to this building at this point.
That's correct.
I'm certainly sympathetic to the plight here. I just wish it wasn't a 10-year commitment till we could revisit.
I'll make it 5 years. I don't care, because I'm trying to sell this building. I'm trying to get out. You can deal with it with somebody else as soon as I get out of here.
Was there anyone from the public that had attended tonight that would like to speak on this topic or had questions on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Fred Case, 3165 Husking Peg Lane in Geneva, resident for 21 years here in the city. I feel that we should support the applicant, just for the fact that it seems like the city is always trying to help businesses and tenants in the city by making exceptions to the rules. So I just want to say I'm in favor of allowing this applicant to go through. He's in a hardship, and you hate to see people move away from the city if they're trying the best to make good things work. So I support the applicant's request.
Thank you, Mr. Case.
And if I can say one more thing, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but a point of order, none of the applicants or people that want to give sworn testimony were sworn in.
Oh,
You're allowed to say that.
See why you miss me? All right, that's all.
where is that? You don't have it? You don't have it? Okay, thank you for that point of order, Mr. Case.
I have a question. Are you planning on staying, you're upstairs, right?
I am upstairs.
How much square footage do you have upstairs?
I have a little under 5,000 square feet.
So you pretty much have the whole
I have the whole upstairs.
footprint, yeah. So you,
I'm sorry, can we just make sure we're at the microphone when we're speaking?
Yes, I will. I've been here at this practice since 2006. Marty Gustafson owned the building prior to selling it to Peter Lappin. And then once I bought this practice, my goal was to own this building. And I did everything I could to own this building. And the reason I ended up owning the building is because Peter Lappin went into bankruptcy, and I bought the building. He was not willing to sell the building. And as this lovely man has stated, I have worked my butt off to maintain a good image in this society, in this community. I am a good doctor. I have good reputation, and I pay my taxes. and I'm willing to make this work. But I have to make it work based upon what goes on in this world. And this world has brought us a pandemic that has destroyed a lot of our lives. And nor did I ever think going to school for 17 years, becoming a double doctorate, going into fellowship and all the things that I've done to get where I am, did I think that at the age of 52 that I'd be up here begging somebody to help support me financially. It doesn't feel good. But I have to do what I have to do to keep this going. I'm not doing this because I'm trying to be a pain in the butt. I'm doing this to try to save myself and also all the employees that I support in my office. I have over 8 employees that I have to maintain as well.
Thank you.
I was going to ask a follow-up question. If you sell the building, are you moving out?
My goal is to sell the building and maintain my practice. And I'm also trying to sell my practice because I'm a part of a fossil. Nobody owns a solo practice any longer. You're a part of a hospital system. Money, as far as healthcare, is absolutely horrific now. We don't get reimbursed. So what I'm trying to do, because all I do is work paycheck to paycheck to support staff, the building, the taxes of this community, and I work to pay myself nothing. And what I'm trying to do is sell the building so I don't have that hassle and that overhead and the fact that I can never get a good tenant. And I'm also trying to sell my practice to work as an employee so I no longer have to deal with all of the headache that is involved with owning a practice. So yes, I will stay in the building if all these things come to fruition.
Okay. What is the upstairs zoned as? Just strictly office?
The upstairs could be office, retail, residential, so there's no restrictions on the space upstairs.
How much space would you need? Like, what's the minimum amount of space you would need?
For what, a practice?
Yeah, practice.
I need my space, 5,000 square feet.
You need all 5,000, okay.
I'm going to take a stop for just a second and address Mr. Case's point of order. And if anybody that's going to speak tonight or who has spoken, would you please stand, and I'm going to swear you in. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you have given or are about to give tonight is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Case.
Thank you. I just have, Fred Case, you got that? Okay. Is there a possibility that, as a compromise, that you could allow the change in the PUD to just make it the Edward Jones space? Can you split the building up? So just change it so the people in Edward Jones can move in, the gentleman can get his lease, save the building, and then if a tenant wants to come in after, if the winery goes out, do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, that's,
Specific.
right, that's what was done previously with the PUD, identifying certain space within the building that an office would be allowed. So that can certainly be done to expand that, to incorporate this, the old Needles and Things space. We would just mark up an exhibit for the approval ordinance before we went to city council.
Yeah, so I have a question for the applicant. If you get the Edward Jones space to go in and expand to the front, which is not allowed now because of the PUD, is there an issue? I didn't know if you were seeking to have the whole area up front changed?
I am not seeking to have the whole area up front, nor do I particularly even want to have to seek to have this changed.
Okay.
It's just due to the current climate of what's occurring right now that I need to have it done. The wine guy, Geneva Winery, has signed a 5-year lease, and he's good for another 4 years, and he's already stated that he's likely to sign another 5 years. I feel comfortable with him. If, moving forward, if we can just get 5 years with Edward Jones, and they move out, and they want to change the PUD in 5 years, go for it. That will be fine, as long as the climate of the world is better and we can get a tenant. But this building and this space is notorious for not getting a tenant in this place. Most people that have been there in retail have said it is not a good space for having retail. It's just known. I know that Geneva has it in their head that they want this continuous space of retail. God love you, I understand it. But we also have to understand the climate of the world. People aren't shopping retail anymore. Hello, people, they're doing it online. I know that we have to have something to attract people to do something fun, but people would rather eat and drink. That's my 5 cents.
So back to my original question, if you allow the text amendment change, it would be just for the Edward Jones space, correct? Or are we talking
If
about?
that's the commission's desire, yes.
Yeah.
As submitted.
The application as submitted was to remove the restrictions on office space.
Yeah, well,
The
I
commission
would
can make a
say that if
recommendation.
you could make an amendment to the request to allow the Edwards Jones space, it's that way that if the winery does go out, they would still have to be part of the original PUD for being a retail space. That's my thought.
Thank you. Any other public comments or commissioner comments?
David, do you have any experience on, once these things switch, do they tend to stay that way moving forward, just based on your community development experience? Or do you see them just as often switching back to retail when the time's right?
I mean, I know, in my time here, and even currently in this climate, there's a strong desire from a lot of people to find a space on Third Street. South Third Street is where people want to be. So I guess I would not be nervous about the space going to office and then not being able to get a retail tenant in the future if that office space leaves. Because it is, like I said, a highly desirable location. We see it all the time. We have a hard time getting people to look elsewhere than South Third Street. So.
Michael?
So can we put a time limit on approving something to allow office space in the front?
I guess I would not recommend putting a sunset clause on how long the use could be there, because if it's a thriving business and they want to renew their lease in 5 years, making them come back to amend the PUD to make that extension seems a little burdensome.
I mean, you could put a tenant-specific restriction on it, or you could just focus on the 40%. And then if Edward Jones went out, they could put another office tenant in, but you'd always have 60% of that frontage as retail.
Mr. Chairman, I would clarify, not a tenant-specific restriction, a tenant space restriction would be appropriate.
Right.
But to limit it to only Edward Jones would not be appropriate.
Right, okay.
So, just to clarify, Edward Jones takes over the space, they can't sublease it to someone else as an office space. Can we put that in there?
No, you can regulate the use of the space, but not the tenant of the space.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
But to Michael's point, can we can do a time frame or no?
I would not recommend it. I don't know legally if you can or can't, but I would not recommend it for that reason. I mean, people invest into a space and build out their practice in that space, and then have a sunset clause on that, or, have to go through an application process to continue doing business in that space.
Well, this is my concern. This gentleman's probably not going to be the first one in the upcoming months to come to us with a hardship. So if we're going to make accommodations based on hardships, I think we're going down a slippery slope road. And my only point is, I think you should, if we're going to make accommodations, I think we should consciously understand it's because of the environment that we're currently in, or at least recognize that. Because if we weren't in this environment and no one's wearing masks, we all have to ask ourselves, well, what do we do tonight? Right? I mean, that's what I'm asking myself. So if we're going to make an accommodation, why wouldn't we want to put a timeline on whether it's a new owner of the building has to come back for the PUD, or it's at the end of the 5-year lease? And the reason why was because we were in a crisis that we've never seen before.
I think it's a good point and well stated, John. I think we have to look at this as an application that is specific to this property,
Yeah.
and look at the context of where this property is within the district on South Third Street. We do have office spaces in Dotson Place, up to 25% of their frontage. But most of Third Street is in that zoning district where there's a cap of 40%. So we may see a desire to, in the future, to allow more office space on South Third Street, but that would be a text amendment to the entire zoning district, where it would not apply to a specific property, but to all the remaining properties. So in the staff report, we have the special use standards that we need to address when making this recommendation. I think if you go through these standards, many of them you can say are satisfied because it is property specific. There's not changes being made to the exterior of the building. There's not an increased parking demand. The question I think the commission really needs to ask themselves is amending this PUD for this space going to negatively impact the character of the area and diminish the value of adjacent nearby properties? And if you think you can make an adjustment and satisfy those standards, then you can recommend approval. But if you think long-term that it's going to have a negative impact, then you should recommend not denial.
Getting to your point about not being tenant-specific, could it be tied to a particular lease, whether it's Edward Jones or not? But if they are investing in their space, I'm sensitive to the fact that they're putting money into their space. They don't want to invest in year 4 if they think we can't be here after year 5. But if it's tied to the space and any subsequent renewals by that tenant, that they would allow them to invest but once Edward Jones doesn't want to be there, it would have to go back to retail.
I think that gets into a dangerous territory that I don't think the city wants to find themselves into those private leases.
Too close to, yeah.
If we look at matters of fact, I have a hard time justifying the amendment just based on the comprehensive plan, which is pretty specific to retail being on the frontage on Third Street. And if that's a standard of fact that obviously we do need to justify, I don't know how we get out of that or justify moving on from that standard. I also do wonder whether it would diminish the value of some other retail spaces if we don't have this consistent line of shopping for people further down or up or however you want to look at it on Third Street. So when I looked at these standards and I read, it was really the first two that jumped out at me that were hard to justify. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I certainly understand what Brad's saying. What is Edward Jones complementary to a winery? Is, you know, how do those things play off of each other, for example? But it doesn't have to be just those two businesses. It, you know, whatever businesses exist in the street. But it sounds, and I don't know, it sounds like there's some openness to consider this given the circumstances and the times, but without making it permanent. I think that's what I'm kind of hearing from everybody.
I agree with Michael.
I also agree. If we can make it not permanent, I think we have to be reflective of what the current situation is and be realistic. But this is not forever, hopefully not forever. And if it could somehow, not sunset, but if at the time, at some point be revisited. So it wouldn't necessarily be changed, but at some future point, there would be an opportunity to revisit it.
Well, for me, 10 years would definitely be too long. I think I would be not supportive of a 10-year plan. in a 5-year plan, we don't even know if Edward Jones would agree to that. I mean, you seem to think so, right? But we don't know.
I don't know that answer.
Right.
They wouldn't invest the money to build this out and not get 10 years out of it. I don't know if they're willing to
Right.
do that or not.
Exactly.
I don't have an answer.
So we put for me, I would feel more comfortable with the 5-year, but we don't even know if that's worth it or not.
Right, right.
Do we have the ability to table this where the doctor could propose that, or do we have to make a decision?
No, we have a public hearing that's open. We can either close the public hearing and come back and discuss this, and any additional information that we request, David could share with us when we reconvene, or we could continue the public hearing
Yeah.
until such time as the applicant had more definitive answers on length of lease and how much. Because Edward Jones is not interested in a 5-year lease, that doesn't provide him any relief that he's asking for, right? So if they have to have a 10-year lease.
Would that also give, David, would that also give you a chance to investigate the legal situation with whether or not we can tie it to a certain time period and whether or not that's likely to fly with the city?
Certainly. I mean, if that was the commission's desire to continue the hearing, I would look into the legal aspect of putting a sunset clause or a condition that we have to revisit this in 5 years or however many years the commission chooses.
I think that's a fair compromise. So do you understand what we're kind of suggesting?
I do understand what you're saying, but the longer that this takes is not helping the situation for which I'm presenting this.
Sure.
I need to have an answer soon, because you have to realize I originally formatted this PUD, I think back in probably April, and now here it is, almost August, and now you want to take it again and see, I haven't had any rent since February. So we're going to be looking at close to a year, and then once they need to build it out, another half a year. So now I'm back at the problem. I didn't have to come here today because I'm trying to circumvent this problem of my cash flow issues. I understand that you don't have much of a concern about my plight and everyone else's plights out there because we're worried about the aesthetics of Geneva and the flow of retail. I get it, but I'm a human. We're all here to have compassion for one another and to take care of one another on this earth, not money. If we're all about money, then God love you all. Go on your way, just deny this, and I'll go take care of myself. But you know what? This world is all about taking care of each other. And I think it's time that we start doing it now.
I take offense to that because I think what we're trying to do is accommodate the situation. Please understand, this is my feeling. If we weren't in COVID, you probably would not get this passed.
And nor would I ask for it either, sir.
For sure.
For
So
sure.
what we're trying to do is accommodate the situation. If you want 10 years, my point to you is I don't think you're going to get that tonight.
Okay, and
So-
I just
so
stated
just
that
let
it
me-
was 10 years because that's what they offered to me.
Correct.
I don't
So-
care what it is, but it takes a simple phone call to call up Edward Jones and ask them if they're willing to do 5.
Okay.
That's it.
That's what my original
I
question
know,
was.
but then you said you wanted this to be postponed to the next hearing. And every time we do that, and then when you approve it, it's another 2 months after that hearing. Now we're at freaking November.
We haven't decided to postpone it. I think what Commissioner Rittenhouse had asked was, what are our options
Yeah.
tonight? And we
Yes.
were discussing what those options might be.
And just for clarity on what dates would be available, should it be postponed, the next Planning and Zoning Commission meeting would be August 13th, which would then go to City Council in late August or early September
So it's
for a final vote.
So it's a 3 to 4 week delay.
So, I mean, as it's scheduled now, August 17th would have been the city council meeting if the commission makes a recommendation tonight. So, yeah, it'd be about a 2-week delay.
So just so I understand, is everybody on the same page with regards to Michael's point of, because of the current situation, accommodating for a certain period of time?
I think I am.
I think I am.
I'm not as concerned about 5 years. If 5 to 7 year lease is certainly industry standard. 5, 7, and 10 year leases are very common
Okay.
for an office user that's going to invest. If he came back and said, I need, Edward Jones has to have 7 years, I don't think that 2 year, it takes a year to replace a tenant anyway. So if they left after 5, we'd be looking at 1 year vacant, and then we'd be into a new tenant, a retail tenant at that point. But so I don't know if we can address this tonight by thinking about a 5 to 7 year. I think 10 is probably too long. It's going to be a very different world in 10 years, hopefully much more healthy than it is today.
So I think the thing that we have to weigh is if the doctor goes back, if we table this to August 13th, you go back to Edward Jones, they say, yeah, we'll take 5 years. What do they currently have on their lease now?
They have 5,
They
but
have
they're
5,
already
okay.
2 into it, so they
Okay,
have
so
like 3 more.
if they say, yes, we'll do for 5, we'll take over that space, then we come back on August 13th, just so I understand, we can make that accommodation for 5 years, correct?
That, I would get a legal opinion on that to make sure that we are allowed to put that kind of condition
Okay.
on the use of that space.
I'm not hearing that the applicant wants us to do that, though, so I don't see there's any point in that.
But just, I'm sorry, but to clarify, we really aren't in a position tonight to say it will be, let's make it 5 years or 7 years. That's something we still need to, be researched,
I would
correct?
feel much more comfortable after researching that.
The only thing we'd be in a position to do tonight would be to approve or disapprove of the applicant as submitted, or to layer in a 40% limitation on building frontage for office,
Correct.
which would be
That
part
would-
of the PUD and would be in perpetuity. So you'd always have 60% of that building front retail, 40% could be office. That would allow you to feel comfortable that you wouldn't have to go back and research something.
That's an appropriate condition, yes.
How do we feel about that? That is in perpetuity, which doesn't address your issue, John, or Michael's, right? So,
I wouldn't feel comfortable making that decision tonight for perpetuity. So I think the fair compromise is to table this where we can get a attorney opinion, right? And then the doctor can go back and see what they're willing to do.
So, just point of order again, do we want to keep the public hearing open so this can be discussed, or do we want to close the public hearing and come back with a recommendation?
I would recommend keeping it open because there may be additional testimony provided based on that legal opinion or based on the discussions with Edward Jones.
I would love to hear what other retailers feel about this too, that own businesses or operate businesses in the area. So I'd like to keep the public hearing open in hopes that maybe somebody besides Fred wants to make a presentation at a future hearing. So
Well, I would like to state something, that not even 150 feet south of my building, there's a Charles Schwab in the middle of Dean's Market and Geneva Eye Care, all those places. You can go and ask them what they feel about it. And then if you go across to Dotson Place, there are plenty attorneys' offices and whatnot on first floor. You can go talk to them too. They're all over the place. My little building, I'm telling you what, I know y'all think this building is the retail mecca of whatever, but I have struggled in this building to get a retail person. This has been on the market since March. When y'all say this is such a viable space for retail, and David, you said that people are dying to move in on 3rd Street, how come I can't get somebody to rent from me? $22 a square foot, that's it. I pay the utilities. I pay for the build out, so you tell me. You want to send somebody to me? I'll move them in right now.
Okay.
I'm just telling you. It's the fact.
As a fact, I had somebody reach out to me about your space and was frustrated that there was an agreement with Edward Jones.
No, there's no agreement with Edward Jones. It's on the market. There's a lease sign in front of my building right now. It's as big as this panel right here. It says for lease. It's for that space. How in the world am I have a lease sign out there if I'm telling you Edward Jones has it? It's on, go and look at the whatever the MLC, whatever thing is online. It's online. There's a space.
For a moment, the PUD at Dotson has a 25% limit, and that's in perpetuity. So there are, as I pointed out, there is the Edward, or the Schwab.
Right.
That's something that, and it's comforting to me that we have other office users, but they're limited in perpetuity. We're talking about this specific property. If it was limited to 40%, I didn't, I'm not so sure. I don't know how often tenants have turned over needles and things as a tenant I had not visited, but obviously this pandemic hurt them. But to allow 40% in perpetuity is something, for this small 1,500 square feet, I don't know that would be too troubling for me.
I can tell you, I had three businesses in the last 6 years in the space where Geneva Wine is. The alpaca guy was the last guy. He lasted a year inside a 5-year lease. The one before that was Lacey, who owned some Fox and Something boutique. She up and ran in 2 months, didn't pay her last 2 months of rent. And then prior to that was this woman named Marcia, who had some sort of used furniture store, and she lasted about a year and a half. So that's my experience with retail on 3rd Street. Mary stayed there, and the only reason why she can stay open is she used the inheritance from her husband because she was bored. She never even ever once broke even on her rent. And here I have somebody willing to pay rent, someone to keep this place afloat, but God forbid, what are you guys going to do if I file bankruptcy and you have that building just sitting there? You have no retail.
So to John's comment, that is 40% of that space, which is not that big, when you look at the entire street, for example, is it that terrible if it stays that? The other side of it is that it always can go back to retail, and if that's at some point in the future becomes the highest and best use for it, it likely will go back to it.
Right. And to David's point, we can make it space specific, so it really wouldn't be 40, it would be 37.5%. It would be that 1,500 square feet could be office versus not required to be retail.
I hate to be the sort of the naysayer or whatever here, but I am very sympathetic to your situation, to the experience of the building. I think we've all seen that building and retail not really work well in there since I've been in Geneva, but I think we're legally bound by finding the fact here, and I'm still having trouble justifying the first two issues on the findings of fact. And so I might be okay with a shorter term, like 5 years, but I'm not, I don't know. I do like the retail on the frontage on 3rd Street. I like that idea in the comprehensive plan, and it's there for us to follow.
Can I direct a question to you, David?
Sure.
The findings of fact were for the request as submitted, which would have been unfettered office use on that whole entire first floor. Would that change, limiting it to 37.5%, would that change either finding of fact in your mind as far as how it affects the comprehensive plan and/or the value of adjacent properties.
Well, ultimately, it's not up to me. And these findings of fact are drafted for your consideration. So if
Right.
the commission feels that 40% restriction mitigates those concerns and helps satisfy standards 1, 2, or 5, or whatever,
Right.
whatever other standards you feel are not met, if it was totally unmitigated, you can place that restriction and we can amend the findings accordingly.
I do think there's a difference between 40% and unrestricted, so.
Yeah, I was never, without restrictions, that phrase I was not comfortable with from the beginning.
May I ask a question of Brad?
Yes, sir.
So Brad, in the building south of me, it's owned by Shodine, and you're so enamored by retail, do you consider Geneva I a retail center? And do you consider where Charles Schwab's is a retail center that's not even spitting distance from my office that are on 3rd Street?
It's a separate PUD. I wasn't
I know, but
involved
we're
in
not talking
that,
about
so I
PUDs.
can't
I'm
speak
just
to
going
that.
to address what you just said. You said, I like the idea of having retail all down South Street. We're not talking about PUDs here. We're talking about what you prefer. And I'm asking you, do you like the idea?
We have specific findings of fact that we need to go through.
But that's not what you said, though.
It is, and the first and the second are what I'm struggling coming up with. I mean, very specific, these are written, I'm sure you read
But
them
what you did
yourselves.
say is that I like that it is consistent retail down 3rd Street, and those, neither one are retail within not even 50 feet of my building. I'm just clarifying what you stated.
Dr. Heddle, I don't see anybody up here that is not sympathetic to your situation. And believe me, we're trying to find a solution to this. So let's just all work together on this.
I'm trying to work together, sir.
Okay?
I'm just trying to understand.
I think the one thing that, even though you're a separate PUD, the one thing that I struggle with is even when we're in a terrible environment like we are, we still set a precedent. We give you what you want tonight. We set a precedent. And the problem is you sell the building because now you've got the tenants, Edward Jones, and then 6 months from now, someone comes and says, well, hey, you guys made an accommodation here. Why can't I get that? That's what we struggle with.
I understand.
Even though PUDs really don't establish any precedent, is that correct?
They should be considered on a case-by-case basis and evaluated against these standards.
Well, what do we want to do as far as tabling it or closing public hearing and voting tonight, or? I mean, I think we're trying to work with the applicant, but I'm hearing that you're not interested in a delay, is that right?
If you're saying that you can do this within the next month and you want to delay it a couple weeks, that's fine. But you have to understand that it took 4 months to get to this point. And who knows what's going to happen in the future, whether or not it could be delayed another 4 months. And all I'm stating is, I'm right now on the precipice of having a financial disaster. I have taken $100,000 from my own savings, which is all the savings I have, to keep this building going and my practice going. That's all I'm saying. I'm in financial ruin. I'm just asking for some assistance. I realize that I'm just one little piss person in the pod. Doesn't matter, we have to follow rules. I get all that. I'm not trying to be irritable here. I'm just trying to do what I can to save things before I have to file bankruptcy. This is my last stand. That's all there is to it.
Mim, it looked like you were about to say something.
I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. In the current economic situation, the outlook for small-scale retail is not good, and probably not good for the next few years anyway. I am wondering if by allowing some of the space to go to something other than retail, we don't put a tenant in another space that is going to become available because they aren't in this space. If we don't put some business onto State Street, which has way too many vacant spaces, I'm not sure that this is as negative for the long-term well-being of downtown as it might be under other circumstances.
Did you get all that?
Could you say the last part again, Mim?
I don't think this is necessarily so negative for the overall well-being of retail downtown as it would be under different economic circumstances. Right now, reducing the retail supply, even by this small amount, might actually create some demand for another space that is still retail and cut down on vacancy somewhere else. So it's not necessarily a zero-sum game here if we give some relief to this gentleman. It might actually end up being beneficial somewhere else.
Hey, Mem, just to clarify, are you talking about space-specific and perpetuity, or are you talking about the time limit? Because we've got a couple different options we're talking about. But when you're talking about giving relief, could you clarify what that means?
First of all, I like the idea of limiting it to the 1,500 square feet. That makes a big difference to me. I would not be in favor of it being unlimited on that first floor. So I would, first of all, only be in favor of that. In terms of the time limit, I am willing to pursue that. I'm not adamant about pursuing it. I think that would be a reasonable thing to do, but I don't think it's not essential to me.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just to provide some information to follow up on Mim's point there, we looked into vacancy rates in the downtown area, and the office vacancy rate is currently at 4.6% of available space, where the retail vacancy rate is higher than that at 9.5%. So it's not as if we have this huge surplus of office space where Edward Jones can simply
Right.
move there. We are having some troubles more on the retail side.
So you think that if we leave the public hearing open, we would be causing about a 2-week delay? If we came back in 2 weeks and addressed this with your answers about whether or not we're able to address it with a time limit, we could recraft a recommendation, probably on the 1,500 square foot with or without a time frame limit on that.
Right, I mean, 2 weeks would give me enough time to get a legal opinion on that issue. I still don't know that I feel strongly that it's an appropriate condition, legal or not, but that's my opinion.
You feel like the time limit is appropriate or inappropriate?
I have never been a fan of a sunset clause for those reasons, because I don't think it's business friendly to put that on a business.
And if
But that's not to say, though, that in 5 years, if we did put that sunset, that it just is agreed to, and, Edward Jones wants to sign another 10-year contract. We could easily say, yeah, everything's going great, yeah, and it makes sense, economy's still bad. Or, things are hopping, the intent was to have retail space there. I think that it makes sense that, we go back to the original idea of retail space, correct? That gives us that option.
It would give you the option, right?
If we didn't have that option, I guess I'm more concerned about that.
to David's point, the challenge you have is if Edward Jones has a 5 or 7 year lease and they know that we have to move, and then they come back for approval and we say once it has to go back to retail, we're basically telling Edward Jones, and it's 5,000 square feet or 4,000 square feet, that they have to find another space if that's the amount of space they need, and that may or may not be in Geneva. So
Yeah.
Should we vote on the 40% restriction and just see how that
well,
goes
I
tonight?
think if we're going to vote on anything, we have to close the public hearing and come up
Right.
with a recommendation, or if we're going to leave the public hearing open and return,
Then we have to wait to vote.
I suppose we could, we can have a discussion about how we feel about the 40%. I think I would be fine with just the 40% restriction myself. Because I think it's a small enough space, it's PUD specific, and I think I heard some commentary here that does not necessarily set the same precedent as just a non-PUD property. So the 40% limited to the 1,500 square feet on the south end of this first floor, that's currently going to be, or prospectively going to be leased to Edward Jones. I would be fine with making that recommendation.
With no time limit.
No, with no time limit. I personally would be fine with that. It's just a small space, it's one property, it's a PUD, and I'm hearing that it doesn't set the same precedent that other non-PUD properties do.
I would also be okay with that.
I would also be okay with it. I know I'm quiet, just
Thank you,
taking it
Megan.
all in.
I think I could as well, but I think closing the loop on the timing question could be helpful for everybody.
I'm sort of leaning towards the frontage we should stick to the game plan and the comprehensive plan and the downtown zoning, rezoning that we just did, and keep it consistent with what we've been doing over the last few years with all that. So unfortunately, I probably am not. And maybe even the timing question, I think I might be more willing on that end, but I don't even think it would be, doesn't seem like it would be really worth it unless, of course, like you.
So it seems like we're moving towards keeping the public hearing open to get these answers, and then crafting either a space-specific limit with or without timing at the next meeting in 2 weeks.
It's all subject to motions and
Right. Oh, I
votes, yeah.
understand. I understand that, but I'm gathering the consensus.
Right.
We've got 3 commissioners out of the 6 that are here that would be fine with just the limit, but the other commissioners respectfully would like some more definition on whether or not we could add, if we wanted to, the time limit for the tenant. So would someone like to make a motion?
So the motion is to keep the public hearing open and set a date certain for another hearing?
If that's the desire, the motion would be to continue this public hearing to August 13th.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to continue this public hearing until August 13th.
Second.
Okay. Bliss?
Ellsberg?
Aye.
Aye or nay?
Aye. Sorry, it's my first meeting.
Evans?
Aye.
Kasserag?
Aye.
Mead?
Aye.
Rittenhouse?
Aye.
Slivka?
Aye.
That passes.
So that means that August 13th, we'll be back in this room, and by then, you will have probably had additional conversations with Edward Jones on their flexibility and term as well, so.
I will. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I appreciate your help.
Could
Thank
we
you.
just make sure we do have a floor plan
Absolutely.
in that meeting? Thank you. Thank you.
Excuse me, were you in contact with C.J. McCann? Because he's the one that put this whole application together for me.
McCann Properties, there were 2 contacts I had.
Yes, if you can, that would be the contact person to get that
I'll reach out to them and
plan.
ask for the floor plan.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the second public hearing, which the applicant in this case is, where are we? Applicant is SDC 19017 LLC. It's my understanding that the applicant, when they do speak, will be addressing both the zoning text amendment as well as the site plan review and its initial comments, but we will vote on each of those items respectfully and separately tonight. The second amendment is zoning text amendment. It's a request for a text amendment to Title 11 of the Geneva City Code zoning ordinance, Section 11-11A-6, parking spaces and design requirements, to establish separate parking requirements for one-bedroom and two-bedroom apartments located within 1/2 mile of the train station. The applicant, as I said before, was SDC 19017 LLC. David, do you have anything to read into the records?
We have quite the list, so bear with me for a moment. The contents of this file include an application for a zoning ordinance text amendment filed by Ronald Dean of Sumac, an application for site plan review filed by SDC 19017 LLC, final engineering plans prepared by Greg A. Notch and Associates, job 20-0005, revision dated June 22nd, 2020. A landscape demolition plan prepared by McKay Landscape Architects, revision dated June 26, 2020. A landscape plan and landscape details prepared by McKay Landscape Architects, revision dated June 26, 2020. Site plan, floor plans, elevations prepared by Sumac, revision dated May 8th. Copy of the downtown stationary master plan, Opportunity Site 7. A staff report regarding comprehensive planning and municipal parking strategies prepared by the Village of Glen Ellen, dated October 29th, 2019. Parking ratio survey results. Stalled out, how empty parking spaces diminish neighborhood affordability, prepared by the Center for Neighborhood Technology. Access and parking strategies for TOD developments, prepared by the Regional Transportation Authority. Downtown stationary master plan, land use plan. Parking strategies to support livable communities, prepared by Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. Empty spaces, the real parking needs at 5 TODs, prepared by Smart Growth America. A staff report from the Community Development Department to the Planning and Zoning Commission dated July 23rd, 2020. A certificate of publication for from the Daily Herald for the legal notice that was published on June 30th for tonight's hearing. Public comment from Geneva resident Rod Nelson dated July 21st, 2020, copies of which should be at your seats. Public comment from Geneva resident Chuck Miles dated July 22nd, 2020, again, copies of which should be at your seats.
Thank you. The applicant would like to approach the podium and present.
So, Mim, we're not going to be able to see you for a minute, but you should be able to see the presentation, and then we'll bring you back when the presentation's over.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
great.
did it. So just use the arrow keys there. And
Okay. Thank you. My name is Ron Dean. I'm with Sumac, and I'm here on behalf of SDC 017 LLC and Sumac Jupiter, where the sponsors this development. As you see on the screen is an artistic rendering of the project we're proposing at 609 South 3rd Street, the corner of 1st and 3rd.
the arrow key's not working?
No. Let me see if I can do something else. There it goes. If you're not familiar with the location, this is the old Duke and Lee's service station on the corner of 1st and 3rd, kitty corner from the metro station and across the street from the Kane County Center. Your downtown commercial mixed-use zone incorporates that site in the area highlighted with the white line, which is an ideal TOD location, transit-oriented development. So that's what drove basically our planning for the project. Basically, we had several design and development concepts that drove how we approached this and how we discussed this with our city staff. First and foremost was to complement and expand upon the city's downtown station area master plan, the goals and objectives of that plan. And then expand Geneva's 3rd Street corridor, bring it south providing some more commercial space along the street, and then give residential units and a mix of units in a transit-oriented development. That implies the type of lifestyle, unit sizes, and live-work options that work well next to a transit stop. We wanted to continue a strong street wall that has been building along 3rd Street, prioritizing pedestrian access, putting the parking in the rear of the property and having only one vehicular access, which is off 3rd Street. We wanted to architecturally complement the 3rd Street corridor while providing a modern, I would guess I'd call it an anchor to your south side of the corridor. And of course, develop a relationship with the city and the city's residents to collaborate on future developments that may come as a result of the changes you've made. The parking ratios is what drove this and the TOD together. So you'll see in the summary there, the project has 60 apartments, but 63 parking spaces. And when we look at a TOD project, a site that's very close to a train station, and all the amended documents that David applied and put into the record, they find that parking ratios tend to be lower, and studies have proven that. So we came to a discussion point of lowering from your existing ratios to basically 1 parking spot per bedroom on the 1 bedrooms and 1.5 parking spots per unit on the 2 bedrooms. So that's what's outlined in the text amendment. In addition, just to give you the rundown of the building, of the 60 apartments, 45 are 1-bedroom apartments of approximately 790, 800 square feet. Those will rent from between $1,800 and $2,000 a month. That's our estimate. There are 6 2-bedroom apartments. They're the corner units on each floor. Those are bigger, 1,200 square feet. And we anticipate those renting for $2,100 to $2,250 per month. Then, based on the geometry of the building, we were able to get a few 9 1-bedroom plus den units, so they're slightly larger than the 1-bedrooms. They're about 975 square feet, and they land at a price point in the middle, $1,900 to $2,100 per month. In addition, on 3rd Street, we've got 2 retail spaces for a total of just under 6,000 square feet. Just a couple review of the elevations for you. This is the 3rd Street elevation. As you'll see, 3rd Street slopes down from the train tracks. So we've pushed the entrances for both the commercial and the residential units towards the south end of the building to take advantage of the ability to get some taller spaces that commercial and retail prefer, and then tuck into the hill a little bit to address kind of the height of the building. So that's the ground floor, and then the upper 3 floors are repetitive apartment units. Here's the 1st Street elevation. The retail wraps around the corner, and then the parking entrance is to the right there off 3rd Street. The materials that we have in the package don't show well on the projection, but we're proposing cement board panels, cement board siding, and thin stone veneer on the corners, so a stone look. There'll also be concrete and stucco on some of the elevations where it looks, I'd guess the white elevations on the parking garage. Then we have a review of the plans for you, just so you can see them. 3rd Street's to the left, 1st Street's at the bottom. You have 2 commercial units bisected by the entrance to the apartments with an elevator lobby, 2 elevators. And then the parking is all underneath and behind the building. We were able to get 25 parking spaces under the building, which means they're enclosed. And then the rest are open to the back. Garbage is right at the corner there at the entrance where the cars come in and out. That's the dumpster location. And then the typical floors have 20 units each. The larger 2-bedroom units are the corner, so the bottom left and the top right, the kind of pointy corners of the building. Those are the larger units. 2 stairs, and then some storage and 2 elevators in the core. And then just so you could see a little bit of what these 1-bedrooms, which are the primary unit types, look like. They're about 800 square feet. There's a fairly good-sized bedroom. We designed those to have a king-size bed and some furniture, walk-in closet, a living, dining, kitchen, open plan concept. And we work in a desk niche, which, as everyone needs to work from home these days, is, I think, something everyone's going to want. And then a fairly generous bathroom, and then a separate laundry with the water heater and furnace, everything in unit, off of a little mudroom. So that's the basic project. I welcome any of your questions and look forward to conversing with what you guys think of the project.
Thank you. Commissioner Slivka, do you have any questions?
So the building is 44 feet at its highest point. And I mean, I think it's nice that it takes advantage of the sloping down from the train tracks. Do you know the relationship between the elevation of this building and the buildings on the other side of the tracks, the apartment buildings, for example?
Like the Dodson place?
Yes, on the west side of the street.
I don't know specifically, but probably that's got a gable roof on it, if I recall right. So it's probably about the same once you get to the top of the gable. But
I
we'd
don't
to
have the
look and see.
number off the top of my head, but it is around 40 feet, the Dotson 8 building.
So probably fairly similar then once you start to move down the hill. And I guess that's what I'm saying. I think it probably, this building probably works well with the height of those buildings as well. So, and maybe Dave will need to address this, but the parking, so the parking numbers that you presented are what you think are right for this building, and the tenants will, that'll be the right number of parking spaces.
Correct. Correct.
There's no parking for the retail shops, either employees or customers, and that's not required, is that right?
For the retail, no, this is in the moratorium area, right?
So I guess my question is, what happens if the residents, if there are 90 cars? And, I mean, what are the options? What happens to those cars? Is there anywhere, like in the city, there are all kinds of garages. You can go rent a space, a lot more street parking. So what would be the other options if there wasn't enough parking?
There really isn't. I mean, it really comes down to management and leasing those spaces. Discussions between management and the tenants that there's available spaces for the cars that I have before renting the space.
So there's, I guess what I'm saying is could there be additional parking on streets somewhere as a result of units that have more than one vehicle?
I mean, we certainly have public parking available in the nearby area and throughout the downtown. A lot of it is commuter parking, so it's time restricted. And then other lots are also time restricted, so you would be able to use those lots, but not on an overnight basis. Right.
Okay. I think that's what, question. And then I just had one other question about the drive. Is that a full access in and out, or is that right in, right out only?
It's full access. It keeps the same access point that Duke and Lee's has right now. So it's a full access point in and out.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Brad?
Go ahead, Tim.
Question. Duke and Lee's, you enter off of 3rd Street, though.
Duke and Lee's has 3 entrances. They have 2 on First and then the existing one on, if I can go back.
So when I saw this drawing, I was concerned that if you're going through that light, coming from the south, and you want to turn left into your complex, it's right after the light.
Yeah, it's the existing Duke and Lee's entrance. Stays the same.
But comparatively, you've got a lot of people here. Duke and Lee's traffic flow was minimal. I mean, like, minimal, right?
Yeah, I think apartment buildings tend to have more traffic morning and evening, before and after work. So there's potentially some more traffic at those times. It's not a retail, so it'd be residence.
So, Dave, can you give us the ratio again? It's 1.5 for one bedroom?
The proposal is
What's our code now?
the code now is 1.5 for 1 bedrooms and 1.8 for 2 bedrooms.
And then what's the den?
Like a studio,
Is that a studio?
like a 1 bedroom with a den, we wouldn't account that.
Because I didn't see, this must be new, right? Because I didn't see the 9 dens on
Yeah.
our packet.
The 1 bedrooms with the den. It doesn't count as a bedroom if there's not a closet, so
So are those considered one bedrooms?
bedrooms.
Okay, so there's 54 one bedrooms?
54 1
Yeah,
bedrooms and
correct.
6 2 bedrooms.
Okay, that's where you came up with. Okay, got it. I understand. Okay.
So-
Anyone else?
I did have a question. So just to be clear, outside of the parking issue, is the rest of this by right? Is there, how does that working?
What I read was we have the space in the garage, the drive aisle width is not compliant by 2 feet.
Right, okay, right.
24 feet, and they're requesting 22 feet for right-angle parking.
But otherwise, the elevations and materials and everything is all,
That's correct.
no variations there at all?
Right, it's in the commercial mixed-use district, which allows for lot line to lot line development, 100% lot coverage, 50-foot building height. This comes in at 44. It requires the 5-foot setback for the parking, which they've been able to accommodate, which is part of the reason for the reduced drive aisle width. But yes, otherwise code compliant.
So I guess, I think you answered it to Mike, but I didn't quite hear you. David, was, why are there not required some spaces for retail?
We have a designated district for the downtown area that does not require new spaces to be provided for new retail or building expansions.
Okay.
But residential units do have to park themselves.
So what kind of retail do you imagine? Are you setting it up for anything, or is it just literally blank slate, see who is interested?
My opinion is that these would be smaller, consistent with kind of what the previous person was talking about. They're not big enough spaces to support a restaurant, but they could support a cafe. So we probably, well, we're not planning to put in back of house restaurant supplies because we just don't think it would appeal to a restaurant. We think there's a really good opportunity for a quickie mart, for lack of a better term, a kind of grab and go for a commuter and the residents to get some basic staples. It could be even a small dry cleaner, pick up, drop off. They're not big spaces.
Do any of those have their separate parking requirements? Like a restaurant has its own parking requirements, right? Or no, not even in this district?
No, not in this district. We have essentially frozen the parking requirements for non-residential uses
Okay.
at a point in time from, I think it was the summer of 2001.
Well, we've got the city garage and other parking areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eat on Third Street, they can park, I think, in any of those number of spots. John?
The percentage, kind of like the previous case, the percentage of, this is its own PUD?
It's not a PUD. So the text amendment would apply to any residential development. The applicant had proposed within a half mile of the train station. Staff is recommending that we use the boundaries of the downtown station area master plan rather than just a half mile ring from the train station.
Could you show us that at some point?
Yes, and you should have those maps in your packets, but we could pull that up as well. And the reason for that recommendation is because when we did that plan, we actually did that with a grant from the RTA, and part of the argument we were making for the boundaries was that we have a non-traditional downtown where our train station is located at the southern end and not bisecting the downtown area. So really the walkable pedestrian-oriented area for us is to the north of the station. So that's why we were making that recommendation.
So there's, I guess my question is, there's no percentage of retail to living space requirement?
It's required that you have retail on the ground floor, and then residential units are allowed above, but there's not a percentage requirement for office or retail.
I think it'd just be hard to lease an apartment on the ground floor, so you block your parking with retail space, basically.
Right.
On First Street, that's retail also?
Currently next to the site to the east is Citgo gas station. Then the little pie-shaped piece, I think is a cabinetry shop.
No, I'm talking your building.
Oh,
Your building is strictly retail on the first floor?
it wraps the corner, but the First Street side is the parking entrance, so we didn't feel there was really a way to make retail.
Okay, so the only retail's on Third, right?
And that's what your district talks about, so.
Yeah. So David, when the third rail comes in, how much space are we losing just north of that building?
How many parking spaces?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how many parking spaces are lost there, but that's part of the reason we put the third level on the parking deck a few years back.
Okay.
Was in anticipation of losing those spaces.
And expanded the lot to the
Right, and
west of the station.
next to your house.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks.
Which is the part that you said you would be interested in purchasing from the city so that the retail tenants could have some outdoor space?
So, right on the corner, that little bulb-shaped piece that drops below our project, that's currently owned by the city. We talked with David about that. There's a lot of utility lines currently in it. It's actually a former street that was vacated when IDOT, I guess, improved that intersection. So that's where, if a cafe owner, say, were to take that corner shop, it'd be a perfect place to build a little patio and put some outdoor seating.
With respect to TOD developments, you guys, I assume, have a few around Chicago?
We've done different with Jupiter, so they tend to be a little larger.
Okay.
But I think what I see here is the opportunity, and I think your code is encouraging it to do more of this in this zone. So that's what we saw, a good opportunity here. There's very few opportunities next to a train station to do this type of project. So I think you have an interesting opportunity that you presented to invest.
What's been your history with the parking ratios when you've been proximate to metro stations? And compare that to the 1.0 and the 1.5 you're requesting for these units.
Well, the interesting
and
thing.
then the relative usage at those properties once they're occupied.
Right. I think it's interesting because even in David's report, which he attached, they're kind of all over the board in terms of their logic or lack of. But what the studies and what we found is that the ratio of parking to units gets higher as you get out of an urban area, but the usage stays the same. So in your downtown, you're in the heart of Chicago, maybe even Evanston or Oak Park,
Right.
you need fewer parking spaces per unit, but you still need a lower ratio than if you were to park it and it wasn't in an urban area. Next to a train station here, you need more spaces because there isn't a grocery store to walk to. People are going to drive to work. but they're not going to drive as much as someone who lived further away from downtown because they have options, and they're almost self-selecting to a type of person who doesn't need as much car.
Right. So do you have any sites or projects that are comparable to this? And what has been the history? Is your parking, do you lease the parking out per unit? Are those all leased, or is it just first come, first serve?
It's leased, so, and in this particular project, if you have indoor parking, you would charge a little more for the indoor than the outdoor.
Right.
It's contained or gated, so that's a higher value product than a parking spot that's on, just an open lot. In terms of experience, the ratio here, we actually think what we're proposing and what we talked to David as we worked through it, we think is appropriate for your place in the distance from the city, or how urban you are versus how rural. You could go much lower in some other TOD locations where there's more dense services and more dense population. But out here, Geneva, our opinion is this is the right mix. That's what we think.
So if your stabilized occupancy is 57 units, say it's 95%, you expect that your parking will be leased at about the same percent? You'd have a parking available for those 3 units that are unleased?
Yes, I think so, and I think what the research even shows, the parking kind of drives the number of spaces, or the number of units drive the number of spaces. So even a fully parked unit mix will not always fill up all the way in a TOD. So you have still some extra
There will be that tenant
capacity.
without a car, is what you're saying?
Right.
That takes an Uber to Aldi or Jewel, or and just
Right, or-
everything else is on 3rd Street.
Yeah, the type of residents, they're not the type that own 2 or 3 cars just because they want an extra car.
Right.
They tend to be self-selective in terms of the people who want to live and walk downtown.
As I was reading all the backup material you did about new parking philosophies and not having strict numbers and things like that, especially in TODs, there were a lot of, I think, creative examples of how to address the parking with rideshare spaces, bike racks or bike cages, things like that. But I didn't see any mention of any of those more creative ways of serving the residents and making sure that they were taken care of, instead of just not having enough spaces potentially.
Well, I think we will have bike storage.
Okay.
We assume every unit would have a bike, so we'll make space for that in leftover pieces of the garage, and they have storage units on each floor. We did talk briefly early in the process with David and his team about if we needed more parking, where could we find it and lease it? And the opportunity is, I think, there because of the amount of parking you have in the downtown and the difference in usages. So a commuter uses the parking lot from morning till evening, but someone who lives there uses the parking lot from evening till morning. So there's a good co-sharing of that parking use. Whether we could get to an agreement and how to arrange that, that was the issue that didn't get addressed very well.
I think the
You wanna
challenge.
speak to that, David?
Yeah, I think the challenge we had there was like looking at the commuter parking. At what time would you have to be out in the morning? So you can't really rely on those spaces for the residents living there, but you certainly can factor those in when you consider guests visiting the site, which are likely to occur on nights and weekends and not during the day when those lots are full.
Do you know, of all the parking down there, are we currently maxed out?
We had a wait list for permits.
Okay,
Right now is a whole nother story.
that's correct, correct.
The parking. But yeah, there was not a commuter parking.
We used to have a space. It took us over a year to come
So
up
how
on the
many,
wait
how many total spaces are there?
Commuter parking? I don't know.
What percentage of the garage is dedicated to commuters?
The entire thing.
the entire thing.
I should say there's a small strip on the first floor that's reserved for the retail spaces there, but yeah, the majority is.
In the old normal, what percentage of the garage got used on a daily pay basis?
That was full too. I think the only lot that I would ever observe really not being full was the overflow lot on the other side of 31.
Yep.
That wouldn't
Under the
always fill.
trellis almost.
Right, yeah.
I've heard the top deck of the parking garage is not always full too. I don't know if that's true or not, but.
I think on normal weekdays, it usually was.
It is.
Yeah.
So looking at, when I reviewed the planning, there was going to be a parking garage just to the north of this proposed building that could possibly have a walkway to the lot you're talking about.
The overflow lot.
Is that still plausible or no?
So, I mean, what you're referring to is the opportunity site development
Yeah.
concept that was shown in the downtown master plan.
Yeah.
And that had shown a pretty neat concept of redeveloping really that entire pie-shaped area there that includes Sitco
Got
and
it.
the other buildings there. And the idea was maybe you get a mixed-use building there with a parking deck that could accommodate some commuter parking. And then, yes, a pedestrian bridge over to an overflow lot. And talking with Sumac, they were looking at a larger project here. Weren't able to reach agreements with other properties to make a larger project, but
Yeah.
believe that the design of this building is set up where if those properties became available, they could expand the concept.
But the city wouldn't have the parking infrastructure to support that. I mean, I guess what I'm concerned about is the percentage of what they're asking for is quite large versus what is code, right?
The one space instead of 1.5 spaces.
Correct.
Right.
If they continue to develop that, will that be able to support it in the future?
I mean, we would have to look at that plan when it comes through, and we would have a real-world example here to see if these parking ratios are indeed working. I think if there's a concern about commuter parking, then that would be a discussion we would have to have. And with the city council, if they're willing to invest money into the project to get some more commuter parking in that area.
Can I suggest we ask Ma'am if she has any questions?
Sure, yeah, let me.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
And then we'll go to the public comment.
Okay, question for David. David, I appreciated your report and the research that you did on the other communities. Did you get any feedback on whether or not they were finding their ratios to be adequate?
No, we don't have that feedback. I don't remember seeing any of those comments in the survey we sent out. I'm trying to figure out how to put you back on the screen here. There you are, all right.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so we don't really know if they've found those ratios, whatever they were, whether they were higher or lower, to be adequate. So we don't really have any experience to draw on whether or not this is reasonable, other than the applicant's experience in other projects that he's been involved in.
Well, I think it was the CNT study did state that even in those TOD areas, they found that, I think it was like 66% of the parking spaces provided were utilized in those TOD areas. So you still had a large vacancy of overnight parking, even with those reduced ratios.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Another question I had was, currently people cut through that Duke and Lee's when they're going from the spillover commuter lot off of First Street to the station and back again. Are there any allowances or for, how do you envision those train riders getting back and forth between that lot and the station once your property is developed?
Well, the sidewalk will remain, the sidewalk on both First and Third Street, so they just can't cut through the lot because there'll be a building there now.
I was one of those people who cut through the lot, so I'll have to allow more time. But that is, I'm sure you're aware, quite a significant number of people going back and forth.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of people on the sidewalk at that point. David, there was a letter that brought up the 15% affordable housing question. Could you comment on that?
Yes, we had considered, both at the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council level over the past year on whether or not we wanted to adopt an inclusionary housing ordinance that would require developers to provide at least 15% of residential developments as affordable units. And ultimately, that was decided against, and we opted to approve incentives to encourage affordable housing. So there is not a requirement to provide affordable units within the development.
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
To that point, maybe the applicant could speak to their approach on affordable units. Have you ever incorporated that into any of your projects? And
When there's a requirement, we have, and often, for example, in the city of Chicago, different wards will even encourage higher levels, and you work through the local staffs to come up with that and look at incentives, and oftentimes there's some bonuses you can use and trade off.
Right.
But for this project, no.
Okay. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask if there's anyone in the audience from the public that would like to speak on this matter tonight. Mr. Case.
You have my name and address. Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like the project as a whole. However, I take exception to the reduction in parking. What I didn't see in the packet, and it was quite a lengthy one, was the fact that if you have overnight guests, and where would they park? You can't park in the commuter lot because it's not allowed. And in fact, I don't know anywhere downtown you can park overnight. If somebody wants to have a party at their residence, and they've got 3 or 4 people that are going to come in from different areas, that would be my concern.
I know the answer to that. You can park on the street.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
You can park on the street overnight.
Oh, you can,
Did it last weekend.
but not in the metro lot.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
On the street, you definitely can.
The lots are open on the nights and weekends. I think what we were discussing earlier was that you can't rely on that for resident parking because the
Right.
commuters come in very, very early.
Correct,
Right.
correct. Yeah, but that my main concern is the reduction in parking. I think it's way too much, even though there's a lot of data that was presented in the packet that shows that there are, what was the percentage, 60-some% went unused. Yeah, that's a maybe, not a fact, as far as I'm concerned. So the only other concern, one other concern I have is the entrance and exit off of First Street. If you're coming from the south from Batavia up 31 and you're coming from the tollway, you're not going to be able to make a left-hand turn into that parking lot when you go past the traffic light. So there could be a problem there with people wanting to enter, if their work is coming them from the south side of the city up 31, up First Street, making a left-hand turn to get into the parking spot, they'd have to go up, turn left at the parking, at the stoplight, have to go all the way up to South Street, come back over to 31, come back down again to get into the building.
Why is that? Why can't you take a left? You can turn left now into Duke and Lee's.
Right, I know you can, yeah, but I'm looking at more traffic
You
than
back
Duke
it
and
up.
Lee's has.
You would back it up at that light, like, way back.
Yeah,
I just have a hard time thinking that there'd be 4 cars trying to get into that lot at
right.
one point.
That's just a thought that I had. it's my feeling. So, other than that, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Because
Anyone else?
at-
Oh, good.
Can I clarify, at that light, 31 narrows down into one lane as you pass 3rd Street, right?
As you go south,
As you go north on 31.
I guess both, yeah, it funnels back down to one lane.
Yeah, so to his point, once you get through that light, if I'm turning left, I'm backing up traffic down 31.
I think at that location, you would still have the ability to go around at that access point. Now, if we have that aerial, we could pull back
Just
up.
on it's hard to tell. It looks like it's. Looks like it might still be wide enough, but. But to your point, John,
And we got the
even
tree
one
over
car turning in could back up
For sure.
4 or 5 cars. And that would be typically at the end of the workday.
If you have the C 1.1 shows that entry, I think, pretty well.
Okay. I don't have that on the presentation, but.
Which one?
C 1.1.
Do you have a page on that, Michael?
It does look like it's 3
Yes.
lanes coming south and 1 lane going north.
Right.
David, in researching all this for TODs, what do people in Glen Ellen and all these other cities do for a party situation or an overnight guest for a week? Your mother-in-law is going to come for a week. I get that it's a commuter and not as many cars are expected, but I mean, that's going to happen inevitably. So what, do they set aside some spots, guest parking at least? Or is it like downtown Chicago, you're on your own?
I really don't know how they manage those specific situations. In the research we were able to get, it really is about the ratio for the number of units. And the utilization of those spaces overnight is what we've been able to measure. But when guests are there on nights and weekends, we do have public parking spaces available in the downtown area. But yeah, so I can't answer that question with how they address guest parking.
And that wouldn't be unique for this property. I mean, there's other Dodson Place apartments or even residential homes in the downtown area. If they have a celebration or party for a weekend or guest, they have to find a place probably to park on the street and move it from time to time or something.
Or they get the pleasure of saying, "You can't stay with me, Mom."
Right. Have you guys thought of guest spots or anything like that?
Well, I'm kind of personally of the opinion you have a lot of parking, and it is off cycle with that, so I don't think the project needs to set aside and have the cost of additional parking for guests. We have talked briefly with David about signing a little spot next to the bus stop. I don't know, I forget what we last left that, but to have at least a spot for someone to drop someone off. Pull over on the side and drop.
David, can you park overnight in the parking deck? If you pay,
I believe it's unrestricted overnight. Yeah, I think it's just during the commuting hours.
so guest parking on weekend, they could park, just pay the fee and park.
Yeah, you
So it's
could also do
restricted.
that. Pay the fee if you're going to be there during the day. It's $2 a day. Or the overflow lot as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're talking about reducing the parking essentially by a third. Is that right? Because I think if my
Yeah.
calculations were right, it was supposed to be 92
All right.
based on our current codes.
Correct.
Just kind of rounding numbers, we're taking it down by a third.
And I will say that in our discussions with not only Sumac, but other developers interested in doing apartment buildings in downtown, it's been a common theme that they're looking to reduce the parking ratios to be more in line with what's being proposed. because they believe that's what the market supports, and that in the downtown area, anything more is really over parking the units.
What I like about this coming up at this particular site is it's a relatively small project with respect to what could be built on if this was a larger site, and this, providing this relief. I realize we're making a text amendment change, but we'll be able to watch this, and is there excess parking at this site, or is there something that will cause us to change this in the future going forward for future properties, right?
And I do think there is some self-regulating,
Yeah.
that, I'm not gonna lease an apartment if I have a car I can't park,
Right.
or two vehicles that I can't park. I'm gonna look elsewhere.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on this issue? Okay, thank you. We'll continue. Could you approach and?
My name is Frank Orr. I've been a Geneva resident for 23 years, and I've seen Duke and Lee's 30 years and so forth. I'm listening to this proposal. I'm hearing about the parking. I already know that there's very little parking outside of the permit parking, unless you go to the garage across the tracks. The retail places that are on the bottom level on this structure, how many facilities do you expect to be there?
There's 2 units.
There's 2 units. And if this is retail like typical Geneva, I would expect a fairly good flow of people. Would you think that would be pretty good assumption, being in Geneva?
Mr. Dean, if you could come back up when you address his question, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think every retail shop wants foot traffic, so that's correct.
So my question then would be, where are all these people gonna park at? If the parking is already very light, and people wanna come into the shops there, where would they park?
So there's, and maybe David, you could point them out, but there's set-aside parking for the retail next to the train station behind Dodson Place. There's a few others along the streets as well.
But there's no accommodations that you're planning for this facility?
There's no dedicated parking for the commercial tenants on the site, no.
Okay. And then the next question would be is, if you've got 60 units, where would be the unloading and loading docks or facility or area when people are moving?
Where's the keyboard?
Would
I'll
that
show
be
you.
a hindrance to any of the traffic flow then?
So if you see, you pull in and to the left.
You can use the mouse if you'd like. Should be able to. Maybe.
I don't know how to get it on that screen, but you see where the elevators are, the 2 elevators?
Mm-hmm.
So that door is the access to the garage. We anticipate that is basically you park your moving van right there as you unload. And remember, these are 1-bedroom units primarily, so a 1-bedroom unit fits in the smallest rider truck typically. It's 1 bed, 1 couch, and some furniture. So they're not large trucks when you move into a 1-bedroom apartment.
So the entrances, the allowance for clearance will be sufficient?
Yeah, actually, there it's about 15 feet from the ground to the underside of the beams. Just by nature of the way the ground slopes, we end up with a pretty high area there in the parking garage.
There would have to be clearance for a fire truck too, right?
Yeah, the fire trucks are requesting clearance to drive in. They'll have access to come around and into the parking lot to access the building from the back.
I'm thinking if a fire truck can fit in, a Ryder moving truck can fit in.
Correct. So I think operationally, yeah, if you had more space, maybe you'd do a loading dock, but for 1-bedroom units, the trucks are, people rent them and they're small, so I don't see a need for one on this project.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Ellsberg, did you have something you wanted to say? It looked like you did.
Oh, I was just going to get clarification from David that no retail is required to have spots, correct?
So, yeah, it was 2001, the city passed an ordinance, or an amendment to the ordinance that really essentially froze the amount of parking required for commercial and restaurant uses in the downtown area. It did not do the same for residential. The Duke and Lee site really did not have any dedicated parking. It was pretty much a gravel lot that was a free-for-all, yeah.
But to the gentleman's point, it's not his problem to provide additional parking for shoppers.
Not a requirement.
It's not required per the zoning ordinance, right? If you need a laser pointer, I do have one here.
Okay, thanks.
And to that point, I envision that retail will just be a continuation of folks coming down past the spice store and the burger joint and walk across the tracks and go to those, and they're already parking in the various parking options up along, on and off of 3rd Street, so.
In terms of available public parking, the great majority of it in the downtown is in this south area.
Right.
with the commuter deck, behind the Dotson buildings, the new lot off of 4th Street.
Right.
I'd add for a TOD development, you have a lot of parking nearby. So it's actually a bonus compared to, say, if you wanted to do this in Oak Park or a more dense, you wouldn't need to address parking for retail, or the city would have a different discussion, but, you have a lot of parking right here.
Right. Do you mind, David, showing us where the area would be that this text amendment would be effective?
Sure.
Because it's not going to be a ring, as you said, it's going to be probably from this point going north on a radius, right?
I gotta turn MIM off again, sorry. It's the share screen. Sorry, somebody put too many attachments in this packet. There it is. There we go. Remember that page number, 149. So these are the boundaries of the downtown station area master plan, and that was staff's recommendation that these apply to residential developments within this boundary instead of just a half mile from the train station.
So all of the
Color?
bolded black areas would be included as,
Anything that's in color here. Really?
anything that's in color.
Yeah.
So including, okay, all the yellow, including the government center as well, all that.
Yeah, so if that were to convert to residential, same parking
So
requirements would apply.
any property shown here, I would imagine that's about a half a mile, at the farthest edge, is it close to half a mile?
It's a little bit more in some cases, and that's where we had to have that discussion back and forth with the RTA years ago, kind of arguing that our walkable downtown area extends beyond, a little bit beyond a half mile, and came up with these boundaries.
Okay, So this is, you're going, what's the, Stevens, all the way up basically to Park Place is on there, right?
Right, so you would go all the way up to,
So
yeah, Stevens Street on the north,
we would consider Park Place then a TOD, or could?
within that zone. I wouldn't say, call that a TOD style development, but it would be.
I agree,
right,
but they would be, the parking, if we do this text amendment, but the parking for something at Park Place's location would be reduced for 1 and 2 bedroom units.
Right.
That feels a little bit cumbersome to those areas north of 38, me, anyway. To lose, in this instance, we lose about a third to the parking required.
By cumbersome, you mean it's too loose?
Yeah, I just wonder if I fully understand it at the Duke and Lee site, or at sites, you know, very proximate or more proximate to the metro station. And I think we're talking the metro station, we're not talking just any Pace bus station, right? We're talking,
Right.
and for our text amendment, you're talking about this entire yellow colored area that would be reducing all the parking required for residential.
And specifically for apartments, not
For rental apartments.
for apartments, right, or condos, not for townhomes. As it's set up in the zoning ordinance, it's broken out into,
This is stacked flats, essentially.
right, attached single family, detached single family, and then, right, stacked units.
So stacked rental or owned stacked flats would be subject to the reduced parking.
And, excuse me, David, and that's only for 1 and 2 bedroom units specifically? That's
Right.
being changed,
We're
right?
not proposing any changes to studios or 3 bedrooms, or 2+ bedrooms.
And
And I
what,
suppose those areas north of 38, as I look at this, there are folks that park on the street overnight, probably, for the regular, single-family residential. So if there was some parking issue, that area does accommodate more of that than does the core of our CBD.
so what would our new parking requirements be for 1 and?
1.0 spaces for 1-bedroom units, 1.5 for 2-bedroom units, no change on the existing multifamily requirement for studios or 3 bedrooms. It would just be the 2 units types that are in this particular application. I think one of the things I read, David, is that we were going to address TOD parking. We just, it has not, the city staff has been busy with other things. That is something that's, you'll still roll your sleeves up and address at some point, maybe in a broader way, right?
Well, this was one of the key components of the TOD, was looking at the residential
Right.
parking ratios, because we felt that they were too high. So this kind of kick-started that process for us. We weren't quite ready, weren't quite there yet, but then the application came in, so we dug in. Wonder if I could put,
I guess that begs the question, do we,
this on the screen as well, just as another potential boundary for those regulations. This is where that moratorium applies for the retail and commercial parking. It doesn't quite extend to the same distances as the downtown station area master plan. It's a little tighter to State Street on the north, going up to, I think, Peyton Street there. It doesn't encompass as many of the residential sites that we identified in the downtown plan, like the west bank of the Fox River to the north. That was envisioned to be a higher density residential. So it wouldn't encompass those properties, but it would kind of stay right into that core downtown area, and still does include the Duke and Lee's property to the south.
south of 38, there is is there timed street parking, or can you park 24/7 on some of the areas in yellow?
On State Street?
South of State Street, the residential areas, but, say 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, north of South.
It's a mixed bag, so some streets do have time restrictions, others do not.
Do you know overnight, can you park without restriction? I can understand.
Street by street, I don't. I could probably find a map for us if we need to.
Yeah.
David, can I ask a question? Why is the applicant asking for us to rezone everything versus just this property that they're developing?
Well, we had some discussion early on about that. Typically you can just request a variation to reduce the parking standards. That's capped at 20%. You can't grant the variation to reduce the parking by any more than 20%, which the 63 spaces would be more than that 20%, so a variation was not an option. Then it was, well, could we process this as a planned unit development? And it's an avenue you could take, but this was really the only item that didn't comply with the zoning ordinance. So we didn't feel like it really warranted that level. And then finally, we did have it in our goals to take a closer look at these parking requirements. So we talked about doing a text amendment that would apply to this property, but also others.
I agree with John. I mean, I think that when you think of a half mile, that's a lot of space. So 20% variation would be 74 spots.
Right.
I'm not good with distance. How far is it from the metro station to State Street distance?
I mean, you're at, is it like 5 blocks, right?
How long?
1,500,
Those 6 blocks, yeah.
a little less than half a mile.
What's the furthest north point? Like the purple up there on the top?
That's Citron, I think, the old Marquette site,
Here, that would
number
be
1.
All the way to the top,
that's Stevens Street. So Penrose Brewing and
by the cemetery, right, up there?
right, yeah, you got the cemetery here. Yeah,
Penrose.
So if we make this text amendment change, we're affecting all those spots up there.
right. Any residential apartment buildings within that zone.
To be developed,
Sorry.
to be developed,
Right.
or renovated. I guess they could cut parking and be in compliance if they wanted to add units on an existing property.
Wow.
I don't know of many that are up there, but
So
If I missed it, I'm sorry. Why did you guys decide to do the whole district rather than a half a mile?
Because if you strictly took a half mile from the train station and just did a ring, you'd really be, more than half of that would be to the south in a very single-family residential area. That's not really transit-oriented development, or where we're trying to encourage that. So where we were trying to encourage higher densities was in that downtown station area master plan. So that's why we were recommending using those same boundaries.
Can we say something like north to State Street and west of the river?
in the downtown Geneva station area. So a subset of this,
Yeah,
it could be north of Cheever,
yeah.
which would encompass the site south of State Street and west of the river in the DT, downtown Geneva station area.
Something
That
like
seems
that.
like that would be until we spend more time thinking of the implications
yeah,
north of State Street, I think the opportunity to develop meaningful density in the area we're talking about is very limited. So I think we can gauge that a little better than we can north of State Street.
I want to, so if we make this change and that takes effect, and I have 2 cars and I'm renting, am I reading this right, that my landlord then can say, yeah, I'm not giving you 2 spots anymore.
I think it comes down to availability and
For those current structures.
I don't know about current, but I'd say as a building manager, if I have capacity and you have 2 cars, I'll rent them. You can have your 2 car spaces. They may limit a future tenant from having 2. They may only get 1 or, but
Yeah,
that's
but,
where.
I mean, I understand but someone could say, hey, rules have changed. You don't get those 2 cars anymore.
How do you get
Quite
yours?
understanding the question, sorry.
How do you get your spaces in this development? Like, when I lived downtown Chicago, I rented a specific spot. That was my spot. Nobody else could park there at any point in time. It was always available.
Yeah, same
Is that-
situation.
Okay. And if there's extra spots, they're numbered, you're not supposed to use them.
Yeah, or maybe
Could
that's
get
where
towed.
you could talk about, there's an extra spot so you can have an overnight guest with a permit for a weekend. And that's a
You'd
management.
have to talk to the building manager about
Talk to
that,
building
though, yeah.
manager and they'll work that out.
But generally speaking, if you have not paid for your spot, you can't park in there.
Correct.
Does that answer your question? So you could maybe rent 2 spots,
Yeah.
and then you could have your 2 cars.
Well,
and
I think the
then-
ratio is easier to understand when you have a 2-bedroom, because it's, what's the current for a 2-bedroom? It's 1.8?
Right.
Okay, so we're taking a 2-bedroom down to 1.5?
Right.
I guess I fear by us making this broad change right now without more information on who it's affecting, that's a concern of mine, because it could affect people negatively.
I guess, are you talking about existing?
Yeah,
I guess I don't understand how that's so, because this would be requirements, parking requirements for new development. So if there's an existing
oh,
development.
it's not, okay, so it's grandfathered in for existing?
I mean, if it's existing, it's probably, should be parked at our current ratios, which would be, they would have a surplus.
Okay.
John, I think you're worried about the landlord saying to a tenant, look, you're renewing your lease, but I'm only gonna renew one of your spots.
Correct.
But that's still gonna be, if they have X number of spots, unless they had demand for that,
Yeah,
I don't think that would be different than under today's ratio.
Okay.
They'd just say, do you want your 2 spots, or hey, I gotta lease this one apartment building, the project, or unit that's been empty, I need your spot, I'm not gonna renew that to you. That wouldn't be different today than it would be, or tomorrow than it is now, I don't think.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just found some information on our website about overnight parking, so I can speak intelligently to it now. Parking is permitted overnight on most city streets. There are some exceptions. Parking is prohibited between 2 and 6 a.m. on State Street between River and 6th, 3rd Street between Hamilton and James, and 2nd Street between Hamilton and State Streets. No vehicle can be parked more than 24 consecutive hours on any street or in any city-owned lot. Overnight parking is also prohibited in the parking garage.
Prohibited in the garage, okay.
So,
So it's cleared out for the morning commuters, basically, so.
Which
But-
makes sense. They might want to get that 4:30 train or whatever.
And there are areas, I know, along Fourth Street, you can't park during the weekday. I think there's, and it's all marked, but there are a number of city spots. If somebody was there for,
there's a map of the various
okay.
downtown parking lots that we have. And you can see some of the restrictions are listed there as well.
And those are lots, not streets, right? Okay.
Right.
Yes, I'm pretty comfortable with that, and I agree with like what you said, that it's a smaller development, and so we're not all in with, hundreds and hundreds of people and potentially hundreds and hundreds of vehicles. But what happens in the worst-case scenario? That the demand is greater than what we have, then what?
For this development?
Or future developments, I mean, the text amendment.
Well, I think for this development, they won't be able to lease up all their apartments if they've leased up all their parking spots. And that'll drive them into,
That'll drive them to try to locate more parking.
or they'll find a tenant that has one car versus two, or something, a roommate situation where one takes the train and one drives, and so they make it
So it's at their
work.
risk.
That's just market, the market.
Yeah.
The market will take care of that.
Okay.
They're incentivized to get their parking rent and get their unit rent. So, I think if we do this, we should pay attention to this property, and as a staff, we should maybe evaluate how it's working there and whether or not this needs to be revisited for this district we're talking about, and even broader as we change the TOD requirements. And it could be a year out, or a year after the completion, or whatever, that we revisit this. I don't think that has to be part of the motion, but I think that would be responsible management of the parking in CBD, right?
Absolutely.
Are we, I think my only reservation is the downtown station master plan area. It just seems too vast for me to just sort of jump off to that, all of that. I'm not saying I'm not opposed to that all becoming a TOD area in the long run, but in the short run, I'd like a smaller space. I'd feel more comfortable with that. Are we allowed to do that?
Yeah, that would,
Whatever we want, right?
that would be appropriate. Trying to figure out what happened to that map I just had. Give me a second.
Are you looking for the land use plan?
No, I'm looking for the area where the moratorium applies, because that is a smaller area and it's more central to the core commercial zones.
That was not in our packet, right? That was a new ad for tonight.
It was not, and like I said, the reason we didn't recommend that was because it didn't incorporate some of the areas that we did identify for higher density. But it's that heavy black line. You blow that up here.
Commissioner Evans, are you able to see all this?
Yes, I can see it all.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because
There we go.
there
There's
we
the
go.
map. So that would include the Duke and Lee's site, follow First Street up to South Street, and then kind of come back in towards Second Street. And then 4th Street on the west,
Yeah,
up to James, and over to Anderson, up to Peyton.
we don't, and that includes the Mill Race Insight.
So that includes the Mill Race site, that includes the property across the street, which we've identified for some higher density residential development. And it includes all of State Street and South 3rd Street, where we have seen an increased interest in converting some of those spaces to residential units. But the challenge there is of course, meeting parking requirements.
How far west is it?
It goes west to Anderson.
Okay.
So then it goes to 8th, 9th Street, up to Anderson,
Okay.
and back up to Peyton. And I'm not suggesting it's one or the other, I'm just
No.
using it as a point of
So
reference.
it does have the C-Tron site, or most of it, right?
Yes, it does. It has the C-Tron site here.
Okay.
But it stays away from the primarily single-family residential districts in both the south side of State Street and the north side of State Street.
I think it's a good representation of where this type of housing is likely to, come forward.
Right, I agree, I would agree.
So you guys are thinking as is, as proposed?
No, I think they're thinking of limiting it to this area
Oh, okay.
versus all of the colored area on the land use plan.
This is smaller than the color, okay, yeah, it is, obviously, because it's,
What's this considered, Dave? What's this lot considered, or this black?
So this is the area where we were saying those parking requirements are frozen for commercial spaces.
Okay.
This is the boundaries of that area. So any new commercial development outside of the zone does have to park itself.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I feel like where the mouse is right now, that should be included in the area. I mean, that's clearly walkable to the train station.
It is, but it's also a single-family zoning district and primarily single-family homes.
True.
So the change wouldn't really apply there unless we envision that being something else in the future.
Which is not gonna happen.
No.
No, these reduced requirements should only be where we want to encourage this density of development. So we should not reduce the parking requirements in an area that we want to, unless we want to destabilize the single-family area.
Well, I think you have to look at it, there's layers. So these parking requirements wouldn't apply to single-family zoning districts. They wouldn't apply to, duplexes.
Right.
They would apply only to apartments. So the zoning, first of all, has to allow for apartments.
Okay,
And it would apply in those situations within that downtown stationary master plan or within these boundaries or within any other
A subset
boundaries.
of either of
Right.
those.
well, if we approve this with, I like these boundaries better. If we approve it with these boundaries, we do have the opportunity to change it to something else if we see that it's not working. And we have this one project in front of us now,
Right.
which is a relatively safe first project. So I think it's worth a try.
The only thing that troubles me about this is when you cross the river, you really are limited if the parking requirements are reduced and it isn't, and these reduced requirements don't work. There's very limited places for folks to park on the street over there, right?
So yeah, on the east side of the river, you've got obviously the mill race site. You've got the block
Right.
directly east of that. There's like a 60 space parking lot,
Right.
city-owned parking lot there that is not just underutilized, it's not utilized.
Okay.
It is vacant at all times. So there is some overflow parking there. So say the mill race developed with a similar ratio, we do have some cushion there. You've got some of the Island Park, parking that along river there that some people use. There's also a public lot that is kind of tucked behind the senior
Kind of a sliver that goes back in between the
senior living there. There is a public parking lot there that I don't think anybody knows about.
Really?
But if there was a shortage, there definitely is some public spaces back there.
I agree with the other commissioners that this is a more palatable area to initially establish TOD, reduced parking limits, than the overall land use plan for the downtown Geneva station area.
I wish it was
And
just.
to Mim's point, it represents an area where you're gonna likely see more the development of this type, so.
I just feel like it should just be west of the river for now. But that's me. I could jump on board with this. This is definitely more palatable to me, but
Yeah.
I know there is a walking path and a way to get through over the bridge and everything
Right.
from the other side of the river, but I'm just not
It would be
ready to
easy
call
enough.
that a transit-oriented development if you got a mile walk.
It would be easy enough to say the area subject to the provisions of 11-11A-4A west of the river, where we have the moratorium on commercial parking. You could refer to it and just say that the area
Like that.
included in that area that is west of the river. That might be,
For clarity's sake, if it's not this map, I would create a new map.
right.
I would just make it as clean as possible, so there's no question. But with that direction, I can create that
Right.
map, if that's the commission's desire, yeah.
We still have an open public hearing. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say on this, or should we consider closing the public hearing because and this is on the parking text amendment only that we're we were discussing. Anyone? Okay.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second,
Second by Evans.
Celeste?
Okay. Ellsberg? Yay or nay to close?
Yay.
Okay. Evans?
aye.
Kasserag?
Aye.
Mead?
Aye.
Rittenhouse?
Aye.
Slivka?
Aye.
That passes.
Okay, now we're in discussion. Do we feel we've discussed this enough and have a, would anyone like to take a stab at a motion?
Trying to
Feels
figure
like
one
we're
out.
One's for the text amendment. We're gonna have a separate agenda item for the project.
I was gonna say north of Cheever, like, kinda like you said, south of State, west of the river, and then I just didn't have,
Or did you
The
want, or are we
western
leaning
edge.
on the area that has commercial moratorium west of the river?
West of the river. Correct.
is that fair enough with you, David?
The commission's desire, I do think I guess I'm not as concerned about it being east of the river for those areas because we do have some underutilized public parking there. But if the commission wishes to make it west of the river, certainly.
We don't know the overall development over there at Mill Race, though, do we?
It's still kind of in a, I mean, they were looking at around 120 apartments and townhomes wrapping that. Frankly, looking at a similar parking ratio for that,
Similar to code or similar to?
similar to what's being proposed tonight. But we are also waiting on responses from IDOT regarding access, which will have an impact on how many units can fit on the site.
Do you have any idea on timing?
We can ask IDOT again.
Right.
4 to 12 weeks was what we heard a week ago after it had been there for a while already, so.
So it felt to me like we were focusing on the area that had the commercial the moratorium on commercial parking. And the question is, do we use that whole area, or do we just use that area west of the river?
I'm comfortable with either.
Either the
I
whole
would
thing.
say let's go east of the river because there is adequate parking over there for what David said, and why not give the potential developers of those properties some clear direction right now of what the parking ratio is going to be, rather than having them have to come back again shortly.
Right.
I can relent.
I think I could live with the area as defined for the commercial moratorium. Sounds like most can.
What is that exactly? What would we call that map?
What was that code section again? Let me just pull it back up. So, as depicted in 11-11A4, subsection B.
Ma'am, do you want to give it a shot?
Sure. I'd have to,
I made some notes.
no, somebody else ought to, because it's going to take me a minute to pull up everything I need to reference.
Do we need exact language then? We do, right? And you're talking about the metro station too, right? As far as the text amendment, we're not talking about
Well, so
we're just talking about this area. so
if
it
we're
doesn't really
entertaining a
matter.
motion on the text amendment,
Yeah.
the motion can be to amend the parking requirements for apartments, for residential developments as shown, or as depicted in 11-11A-4 subsection B, to 1 space for 1-bedroom apartments and 1.5 spaces for 2-bedroom apartments.
Thank you.
Somebody want to take a stab at that?
I can try. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for a text amendment to Title 11 of the Geneva City Code, zoning ordinance, section 11-11A-6, parking spaces and design requirements to establish separate parking requirements in the area with the parking moratorium as defined in Code 11-11A4 subsection B to require one parking spot for one-bedroom apartment and 1.5 parking spots for two-bedroom apartments.
Second?
It's subject to the findings of fact and the staff report.
Subject to the findings of fact in the staff
Amended here,
report.
Got it.
here tonight.
Got it.
And you second it,
Second.
Mike? Okay,
Second it again.
Second it, okay.
thank you.
This is for the text amendments.
That was my first.
Okay. Ellsberg.
Yes.
Evans. Evans.
Aye.
Kasserag.
Aye.
Mead.
Aye.
Rittenhouse.
Aye.
Zerga.
Aye.
That passes.
All right, thank you. So the parking text amendment passes, which allows us to move on our agenda from the public hearing portion of our agenda into site plan review portion. This is agenda item 6A, 609 South 3rd Street. Request for site plan approval to allow for the construction of a mixed-use building consisting of 60 residential apartment units, 6,014 square feet of commercial space, and 63 off-street parking spaces located at 609 South 3rd Street. The applicant again is SDC 19017 LLC. And the applicant has already presented on this site plan, so we can move into commissioner discussion, some of which we've already had. Mr. Dean, I would just like to take a look at drawing C1.1, where it's been raised tonight that there's some concern for north-going traffic on Route 31 or South 1st Street as it passes through the intersection of the Government Center and South 3rd Street, turning left into the project and the potential conflict that might have if there's traffic coming south that causes them to stop for a period of time. So any thoughts on that? I don't know the distances. I don't have a scale in front of me. I'm sorry. But have you guys gotten to the point where you've done a traffic study or a conflict study, and what would you say to that issue raised?
We have not done a traffic study. The size of the project wouldn't warrant it unless you request it.
Right.
There's immediately adjacent is the Citgo gas station, which also has an egress, or two egress points. I don't know, we'd have to, look and see if they have any trouble with access.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a fair answer. I guess the property you haven't done a traffic study. I guess I come up that way a lot, but I'm always turning onto 3rd Street. So I rarely go through that intersection to notice if there's any conflict. But knowing there's a Citgo station there, I've got to believe there's pretty good amount of traffic turning left into Citgo for gas. So we would have seen evidence of some conflict from left-hand turns. It's probably another 20 feet, looks like. What do we have here?
It's probably another 20 feet, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it's more like 40 feet or 50 feet. But it's not to say someone wouldn't be backing up traffic for that. But that is a concern to think about as you move forward.
I think also cars making left turns across 3 lanes coming out of the garage.
Yeah. That, but if there was a conflict there, I guess they'd be backing up their neighbors. Whether or not there's a safety issue and and a congestion issue, right? So
Yes.
I guess they do that now, coming from either Duke and Lee's, which obviously there's no traffic today, but from the Citgo station, they do turn left.
They do, and it is a little farther removed from the intersection.
Right, right.
There is a sightline issue though, because there is a curve as you go north on 31.
It's true.
That's probably my biggest concern, to Michael's point, going both ways in and out, is trying to address that.
Why can't there be another ingress and egress on Third Street if the city were willing to part with that property?
Part with what?
Isn't the city owns the property directly north?
Right, but that's a commuter lot, so, I mean,
Okay, I thought there was some property directly north that was gonna be like a cafe, could be a cafe outdoor.
No, it's directly south.
South.
The little lobe at the bottom
Oh, gotcha.
is grass, and it's owned by the city, heavily populated with underground utilities. is what I
Oh,
heard
gotcha.
earlier, I think, so.
The Citgo also has two entrances that are spread apart from each other.
They do. Do they have a car wash?
They do. So you could enter by the car wash, or you can go there's a curb that separates them.
Okay.
My point to that is if you're trying to turn left and the traffic's backed up, you can still go further north to turn left into Citgo. With this, you don't really have an option.
I guess the option would be pass it, go into Citgo, turn around, and come into your property.
They're gonna love that.
Which the neighbor to your east might not appreciate, unless you bought gas there. There you go.
Are you guys going to do a traffic study, or are we even gonna see this back again in front of Plan Commission?
not unless there's a desire for more information or revisions. It's a site plan review, so it's a recommendation to the city council. Unless, like I said, you need more information or have concerns and revisions that you'd like to see addressed.
There's the one variance we're talking about is the 22-foot
Right.
drive path versus the 24-foot required. Other than that, everything's compliant, but we are now given the opportunity to comment on things like the ingress and egress.
Does the city have a concern with that, Dave?
It was not brought up in our development staff review. We're consolidating access points to this site, where we have 2 on Third Street right now as well, and those are going away, so that should help eliminate any congestion and conflicts on that side of the property, especially with the train tracks and the commuter lots there.
David, city staff did ask about the sight line, which is the exhibit 1.2.
That's correct, right?
So that we did address per city staff comments.
What was that? I'm sorry?
The curve?
There was a question about the sight line, which you can see on page 1.2.
Okay, there we go. There we go. This required 245-foot sight line posted for 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. Okay. That's actually a great picture to have. So if you were looks like you could, someone turning left could potentially have 5 cars behind them before blocking the crosswalk and or the starting blocking the crosswalk or intersection. You know, I'm I'm thinking about, I live off of Brisher Road. St. Charles just built a couple years ago, right 3 years ago now, 350 unit apartment project with two access points onto Brisher Road, and that's a road I take every day, and was taking it to the commuter train every day. And I went to the Plan Commission meeting in St. Charles, and there was a lot of discussion from those of us living along Brisher about how that's gonna really affect all of our lives on a daily basis. And they have 350 units, it's 100% occupied. We can't notice a difference in the traffic pattern. It's just shocking to me that what we feared, I mean, you see people pulling in and out, but it has not affected in any material way driving down Brisher Road. So I think it's important to consider these things, but I also think these things will, you know, these folks are 60 apartments, they'll be leaving it. Let's assume there's going to be a percentage of these that come out the front door and walk to the train. There's going to be another percentage that go to work. There's going to be a greater percentage than before in the old normal that now work from home. I have a feeling that this will probably be okay. And I agree with John earlier that the Duke and Lee's did not have, you know, potentially 63 cars coming in and out of it a day, but I think this will probably be net good to go from 3 access points, 2 on 3rd Street, 1 on South First, to just 1. And the sightline diagram is helpful for me to see, so that they can see folks coming from the north.
So we can, we could approve, but with the recommendation to the city council that a traffic study be done.
You could, yes.
Would a traffic study take into effect how much stacking there would be?
I mean, it would look at the daily counts, it would look at estimated maneuvers in and out of the site.
Right.
Typically, a traffic study is required when you expect, I think it's more than 100 trips during the peak hours, that type of increase.
We wouldn't have.
Which we wouldn't have with this number of units. That's not to say traffic studies aren't done for smaller projects, they
right.
certainly are.
It might be helpful to do one, maybe even if we're comfortable with it, just to do due diligence on the project, since it is something relatively new to the community. That I think it might answer or alleviate a lot of concerns that people reading about it, maybe after the fact, know that we wanted to cover all our bases, so to speak. It feels like a dramatic change, but I agree with 60 cars. I mean, even at peak hours,
Cars, it is
10%,
going to be a
15% is going to be.
going to take in the train, so that, you know, that
Yeah.
63 cars becomes 50 cars pretty quickly, and
And then at peak hours, it's just a fraction of that.
we're really talking about the point of conflict we see is people coming home from the south. So it's a subset of that. Folks that come out and turn right, go up 3rd to get to Starbucks and then go on to work. They're not going to affect this. If they're
Right.
coming back from the north, they just turn right in, unless they come from 3rd, I guess. But they'll quickly learn that if that's a point of conflict, to come,
Just
instead of
go-
taking
go the
3rd,
other
take
way,
1st.
yeah.
And you can turn right into your own property,
And you avoid the tracks.
and you avoid the tracks, which I
Right.
do often. Yeah.
Just not while the third rail project is going on, right?
Right, not when
That'll
that
be blocked.
bridge is being reconstructed. No.
I don't know. What does everybody think about just due diligence, so to speak, or
Any
I don't want to be
comment from-
burdensome on the developer unnecessarily, though.
The Public Works Department or the Engineering Department about whether a traffic study would be warranted? I don't want to, I don't know how much a traffic study costs and how long it takes, but,
I mean, there, like I said, we kind of look at it from those standards of how many new trips are going to be generated. So we didn't feel one was warranted for 60 apartments in a TOD development.
John, and I think there'd be limited options. I mean, you can't add another lane.
Right.
right?
You
So
really can't.
it-
And, I mean, the expense of doing off-site road work, or to even get a turn lane or something. And again, you're crossing 3 lanes of traffic because you have a left-hand turn lane there too, so.
I mean, Ron, at any point, was there consideration given to a different access point to the site?
Well, we originally wanted the access to be a little bit further west, just to give us a little more buffer from the Citgo station, but it was decided that would get too close to the intersection.
Okay.
So we kept it where it was.
You had the conflicts on Third Street with the bus station.
Yeah, I mean, we had hoped, and that there might be an ability to have almost a full turn-off lane somewhere, you know,
Right.
for a pickup drop-off. But the complexity of dealing with IDOT on 31 wouldn't justify that.
Here's a question, this is a state route, so does the state, or does IDOT have they seen this, and have they,
Yeah, that's been in for review.
okay. So they're gonna know traffic counts, they're gonna know.
Yeah.
So if they think there's a pinch point there of conflict, you're gonna have to go through hoops with IDOT.
Yeah, and I get, worst case, they may tell us you have a right in, right out only,
Right.
which will then cause everyone to have to drive a loop to get in, depending on where they're coming from.
Right. That might be enough check and balance, frankly.
Yeah.
Ma'am, what do you think? I don't want you to feel excluded.
I think it's okay.
So, the other point that was pointed out by city staff was the 22 versus the 24. What does that effectively do, the drive path that in the parking? Is that just in the deck?
So, no, where that developed was that the layout of the parking originally was at the lot line, and after city review, we pushed it in 5 feet to meet the setback requirements. So that causes the exterior parking, because interior parking is not
Oh,
controlled by that setback. So it causes basically that line of parking along the east side to shift over, which tightened up our drive
so
aisle.
it just affects the thinner part of that grayed out area on 1C.1.1? It was just before the,
Yeah, it's just the gray area.
yeah,
No, it does include the other driveways. We took advantage of asking for the change to allow us to tighten up all the parking.
Oh,
so that 22, which is, so you come in, you have the appropriate width until your traffic has cleared, the first
Correct.
4 spots in there, you've got almost 27 feet versus 24 required. Then you slim down to 22 when you've had to move those spots in. And then you've taken that into the other interior spots as well, just having 22.
Correct.
So what does that do for someone trying to park? Does that require a longer car to do a 3-point into a spot, or does it?
Well, that opens a big discussion about how you drive and parking requirements. There are areas in some cities where you're allowed, much tighter distances, others much wider. So, 22 feet works on a, I don't think I would be comfortable going much less than that. So, and that's my opinion.
Do you know what it is in the deck? The commuter deck?
I don't, off the top of my head. I know that we have gone down to 22 feet in other areas, but I can't cite projects off the top of my head right now. Maybe because it's late. I don't know.
I mean, I wouldn't, my personal recommendation, this is a private property, so the
Right.
people parking there will know the parking, and they'll be using it on a daily basis. If it was a public lot, maybe you can make a strong argument 24 feet helps for people because they don't know, they're not used to the turning and what have you.
That's a fair point. Between the spots, I mean, do you have a drawing that shows the column spacing? I mean, how tight is this fitting into a spot anyway, or is it going to be
The spots are all 9 feet clear.
9 feet clear? And then there's columns shown on C11. I guess
Yeah.
I can see them, the little squares with those are your support columns?
Correct.
Okay.
And there are a few, well, they're all 9 feet, so the clearance meets the code.
Okay.
I mean, if you consider that a parking stall depth is 18 and a half feet, you get a full stall plus a few extra feet to back out and maneuver.
Right. And you're gonna turn into your spot from the other side of the lane typically, so.
Yeah, I don't expect there to be ever much two-way traffic happening. Maybe to get 2 cars leaving at the same time.
Right. That's true. That's true.
But it's not a big project with a lot of movement.
True. And we've gone to 22 on other developments, you said.
We have.
Do we make a motion on this, or?
Yeah, is there anything else that you want to discuss with the applicant on the entire project, or is that? We've got the height 44 versus 50, which is allowed by right on a development like this. Was there a mention, the stormwater management study, is that?
It is completed, actually went through 2 rounds of comments.
Okay.
With a couple changes done by the civil engineer to address, he added some stormwater collection along basically where the driveway is, at the entrance to the parking garage.
Okay.
So any water that would slope down would be caught there and collected into the system.
And we hate, the site doesn't have any trees, but it does maintain the tree preservation.
Yeah, it meets the requirements of that chapter, and it adds landscaping to on the north side of the property to screen the parking area.
Okay. That's all I had.
Is signs always kind of like a condition that you guys just for further review for the city staff, or is there some specific concern here about signage?
There's not, I think, with the site plan review, if we were into a known tenant, it makes more sense to say, we want the sign package now so we can see the whole picture. But in a mixed-use development where you have multiple retail spaces, each tenant wants something different with their sign, so I think it makes sense to allow that to come through the normal permitting process.
So that's what I did wonder what that meant with tenants. I was thinking of residential tenants, but you're talking more of the commercial
Right,
tenants.
yeah, once you have a
That
known
makes more
tenant
sense.
to kind of deal with it at that point.
Got it.
And we identified the areas that would be available for tenant signage. Basically, it's right above the commercial units in a narrow band.
What will the property be called, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I meant to say.
You know, we have not named it yet. So if you have any suggestions, we'll take them. Offline if you want.
Something a little flashier than 609.
Yeah,
right.
Duke and Lee's.
I was thinking.
Well, anyone?
Just mention that if we're prepared to make a motion, staff did recommend a few conditions of approval on page 14 of the staff report, mainly to reduce that drive aisle width to 22 feet, to require all signs to go through the normal permitting process, and that final engineering must be approved before any permits are issued. Not that we're far away on final engineering, we just had some minor comments that need to be cleaned up, and waiting on IDOT.
Does anyone want to take a stab?
What do I put at the end, Jim?
There's no findings of fact in this portion.
Okay.
There were, beginning on,
Actually, you do, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
there's, like,
Site plan review standard.
beginning on page 8,
So you can say subject to the findings of fact in the staff report. The usual catch-all. And then note I usually read the conditions.
Yeah, you got that right. So I just make a motion to grant site plan approval? Is that correct?
And you can read, could start on the agenda item there and then just finish off with the findings of fact and the conditions as in page 14.
So I just say motion for site plan approval. Do I refer to the
You read
agenda item?
You read that. and then said subject to the findings of fact, and all further subject to the 3 conditions listed on page 14 of the staff report.
I'm confused. Well, I'll just make a motion, you tell me. You correct me.
Great.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to grant or recommend approval of the site plan. I don't feel like I'm off to a very good start, but based on the staff analysis beginning on page 8, subject to the following conditions. Number 1, in accordance with section 11-11A-4 of the zoning ordinance, that relief is granted to reduce the required drive aisle width from 24 to 22 feet. Number 2, that all signs shall comply with the regulations set forth in Chapter 12 signs of the zoning ordinance and shall be subject to the applicable permitting and review process established therein. And number 3, that final engineering approval shall be required prior to building permit issuance.
Thank you. Anybody, any second?
Second.
Celeste?
All righty. Ellsberg,
Aye.
Evans,
Aye.
okay, thank you. Passereg,
Aye.
Mead,
Aye.
Rittenhouse.
Aye.
Slipka,
Aye.
passes.
Thank you. That includes agenda item 6. Now we're into any other business. Dave, that you'd like to share with us, or?
Not really at the moment. I know this is our first meeting back after several months, so we did have a few items that were kind of put on hold to get to this point. We expect we will now have a meeting on August 13th, definitely. We've got a few other projects, if you're following along on the development projects page, that will be coming up in the near future. We've got a variation, a text amendment, and then we're waiting again on that response from IDOT to begin discussions again on mill raise. The city council did approve the purchase sales agreement for the Lewis Road property. So we expect to have a complete application in from the Burton Foundation for the Emmons Landing project. And once we do, we'll get that posted on the development projects page too. So that'll be coming up in the next few months for your consideration.
Great. It's good to be back together.
Yep.
It is. Thank you all for your time.
Motion to adjourn.
I'm supposed to be gone the 13th.
Second.
I'll let you know. I'm supposed to be hiking in the Cascades
Yeah,
with my
that-
son, but
That sounds
right
better.
now his roommates don't know if I should be there with COVID, so. All right, motion to
Right.
adjourn.
Thayer did it.